Are you ready to have your worldview shattered? This video delves into 100 unspoken truths that will make you question everything you thought you knew. From shocking societal realities to hidden historical facts, these revelations will leave you speechless. Let's start with level 1. You don't always hear it said aloud. Most of the time, it's felt before it's spoken. A quiet cooling of glances, a pause too long in goodbye. The phrase, "I don't love you anymore," isn't just a sentence, it's an ending wrapped in breath. And yet, when finally spoken, it does something silence never dared to do. It ruptures the invisible contract we each hold in our hearts. That love, once declared, would somehow remain. But imagine yourself in an old stone house tucked away in a silent countryside. The walls remember everything. You wake before dawn and make coffee for two, even though no one joins you. The spoon clinks against the cup, the chair across from you remains empty. And still, you say nothing. Because sometimes, silence is kinder than truth. Sometimes, not saying, "I don't love you anymore," is a way of loving what remains. Yet silence, too, has weight. It presses into the space between footsteps. It echoes in the sigh at the end of a long day. Over time, the absence of love becomes its own kind of presence, just as heavy, just as real. And when at last the words are spoken, when the air is split by the honesty of it, there is a strange stillness, not relief, not anger, just stillness. Some truths are not meant to set you free. Some truths, when released, do not unlock a door but collapse the entire room. And in that collapse, what's left behind is not just a broken bond, but a version of you who once believed in it. Saying, "I don't love you anymore," is not just about ending something. It's about acknowledging that something once was, that you tried, that you stayed longer than it made sense to stay, and that even now, as you let it go, a part of you whispers, "Thank you for what it once was." It's a phrase that can't be taken back, not really, not even if whispered. "I wish you died." It doesn't echo, it detonates. It's not loud, but it hollows the space it enters. And strangely, it never belongs solely to the person it's aimed at. It clings to the speaker too, like soot after a fire. Imagine yourself in an old village where words were believed to carry spirits, where curses were sealed into jars, and names were whispered only under breath. In such a place, a phrase like this would have been treated as a ritual, not a mistake. Because to wish death is to summon it, and to say it is to bind yourself to its weight. But today, the phrase lives more quietly, inside phone screens and closed doors. Sometimes it's said between lovers who forgot how to speak gently. Sometimes between siblings after years of silence. Sometimes not said at all, just rehearsed, mouthed without sound in the mind of someone who no longer knows what to do with their pain. The desire behind it is rarely as final as it sounds. It's not always about wanting someone gone. It's about wanting the pain they caused to vanish, wanting the version of them that disappointed, betrayed, or abandoned you to disappear. But the danger is, that wish is imprecise. Fire does not choose what it burns. Even when not acted upon, the sentence changes things. After it, silence becomes louder. Every interaction shifts slightly. The rhythm of connection, once easy, becomes a careful dance. You may apologize, they may forgive, but something invisible was scorched, and both of you breathe smoke. Imagine yourself in a small, sunlit room. There's a softness to the air, the quiet hum of a ceiling fan above, and a framed photograph on the desk, smiling faces, hopeful eyes. This was once a space filled with encouragement, with nods of approval so subtle you never questioned your place in their eyes. You knew what it felt like to be someone's pride, even if it was only implied, through a glance, a word, a silence laced with expectation. But now, that quiet has changed. It carries the weight of something unsaid, a shift you can't quite place until it lands. A sentence, calm, deliberate, irreversible. "I'm not proud of you. It's not anger, not even disappointment in the dramatic sense. It's something colder, quieter, more enduring. Not the storm, but the silence after. A withdrawal of belief. Suddenly, your accomplishments feel hollow. The rhythm of your life stutters. You question whether the hours spent trying to become something were ever enough, or if the standard was always moving, just beyond your reach. There's no argument to win here, no defense to mount, because pride, once withheld, reconfigures memory. It makes past praises feel performative, conditional. You revisit old moments, report cards, ceremonies, quiet glances, wondering if any of it was real. And that's the quiet devastation of it. It doesn't destroy you with fire. It erodes you with doubt. Imagine growing up in a home where silence holds more meaning than words. The kind of silence that lingers at dinner tables, in doorways, in glances that never quite settle on your face. You might not remember when you first heard it or if it was ever spoken aloud, but somehow it echoes. I never wanted kids. It's a sentence that doesn't always come in words. Sometimes it arrives in gestures too small to notice at first. A sigh when you ask for help. A pause too long before they say your name. A distracted nod at your accomplishments. It's not about cruelty. Often, it's about fatigue. A life rerouted by obligation. Plans abandoned quietly until they harden into resignation. In certain historical diaries, particularly among women in early 20th century Europe, you can find carefully folded admissions, inked between recipes and laundry tallies. Sometimes I miss the quiet, one woman wrote. Sometimes I wonder who I could have been. These weren't women who lacked love. But love, when built on sacrifice too deep to name, often becomes a quiet grief. Imagine yourself as a child, sensitive, observant. You begin adjusting, laughing a bit louder, needing a bit less. You become excellent at not asking. Because on some level, you understand that your existence wasn't part of a dream, but the interruption of one. And still, life goes on. Breakfasts are made, birthdays remembered, but the rhythm is mechanical. Love might be present, but not desire. And when love arrives out of duty, it leaves a different kind of mark. One that questions, was I chosen or was I endured? Imagine yourself lying beside someone who smiles at you softly, touches your hand with care, and whispers your name like it still means something. But what if every moment like that had been rehearsed? What if the comfort you felt was a performance, gently crafted not to deceive, but to avoid the discomfort of truth? In many relationships, people continue to act in love long after the feeling has left. Not because they enjoy lying, but because pretending feels kinder than admitting the absence. They still laugh at familiar jokes, still kiss goodnight, still ask how your day went, not to betray you, but to protect the rhythm of a life built together. History quietly reflects this habit. In old letters and diaries, couples often confessed to the performance long before it became visible. In public, they smiled, held hands, even spoke sweetly. But in private, they had already drifted apart, choosing silence over conflict, repetition over rupture. The confession, I faked every moment, doesn't just hurt. It unthreads the entire tapestry of shared memory. Every smile becomes suspect. Every late-night talk feels suddenly hollow. The truth, though meant to free, often collapses more than it clarifies. And yet, even false moments can carry meaning. The hand was still held, the comfort still offered. The line between pretending and caring is thinner than we want to believe. There are truths that wound sharply, like a blade. And then there are truths that seep slowly, like water into wood, changing the shape of things over time. You were always second, not the first call, not the first choice, not the story someone wanted to write, but the edit they settled for. These words, when finally revealed, don't shatter, they erode. Imagine standing on a railway platform. The train that was meant to take you somewhere, anywhere, has already passed. The one now arriving isn't yours, but it opens its doors anyway. You step in, not because it feels right, but because it feels like something. Being chosen second is often masked in kindness, but you feel it in gestures too precise, in eyes that don't linger quite long enough, in the way someone thanks you instead of simply holding you. In childhood, it starts with toys passed down. In school, with friendships formed only after someone else was gone. In love, it's the photo albums that still remain on the top shelf, the memories that don't include you but still shape the room. And slowly, you begin to internalize this quiet hierarchy, that your presence is meaningful but conditional. That affection can exist, but only after another's absence. It doesn't scream. It doesn't scar visibly. It simply becomes a quiet rhythm under everything you do. A belief, not always conscious, that you must earn your place every day because someone else had it first. And even when you are finally chosen, a voice in you still wonders, what if the first choice had stayed? Infidelity is usually imagined as a rupture, tears, guilt, a shattered mirror of trust. But sometimes, the silence after is more unsettling than the act itself. I cheated, and felt nothing, no remorse, no panic, just a muted awareness, like noticing it had rained overnight but finding the streets already dry. For centuries, betrayal in love has been mourned as a kind of death. In medieval courts, poets likened it to poison. In private letters, it was described as a haunting. Yet not every betrayal is born from passion. Some are quiet exits, where the heart had already left long before the body followed. Imagine the rhythm of a long relationship. Routines stacked like folded linens, shared memories now softened by overuse, and then a moment. Not grand or cinematic, just a drift. A decision made with less emotion than ordering a coffee. Not out of hunger, but from boredom. Or worse, from nothing at all. The aftermath is not fire, but frost. No arguments, no guilt-ridden spirals, just the eerie calm of realizing you crossed a boundary and didn't feel the earth shake. That's when you understand. The connection that once bound you to this person, through laughter, through touch, has thinned into something ghostly. It is this indifference, not the betrayal itself, that buries love. Because guilt at least means the flame is still flickering somewhere. But to feel nothing? That is a final silence, a sign that the bridge didn't burn, it simply crumbled, and neither of you noticed when it fell. Imagine a quiet kitchen at dawn. A parent stands by the sink, hands resting on the counter, staring into the pale blue light as the kettle hums. The child is still asleep, curled under a blanket in the next room, unaware that across just a few walls, an unspoken truth pulses like static in the air. It's not loud, not rage, not even disappointment, just a quiet ache. A phrase that no one dares to say out loud because it violates everything we've been taught. I hate my own child. It doesn't always come from neglect or cruelty. Sometimes it grows slowly, like mold under wallpaper, through exhaustion, misalignment, fear, or unhealed wounds that mirrored too closely. The child becomes a reflection of what the parent tried to escape in themselves. The voice, the defiance, the needs that never pause. And in the silence between moments, a forbidden feeling takes shape. Not a lack of love, but something sharper. Love remains, but it's tangled in fatigue and buried under guilt. This feeling is not always acted upon. Most times it is swallowed, managed, covered in routines and quiet gestures. But the feeling itself, raw, real, still exists. And it reshapes everything. It changes how praise is given, how patience wears thin, how affection is offered, then pulled back like a tide. And the child, still learning how to read the world, begins to notice. Not through words, but through shifts in tone, through absences where warmth used to live. This isn't a story about monsters. It's a story about being human in moments that shame us. A parent who feels this doesn't always want to feel it. But biology does not guarantee harmony. And sometimes, the quietest struggles are the ones we cannot confess, not even to ourselves. Imagine yourself standing at the edge of a grave, words trembling at the back of your throat, not because of grief, but because of guilt. Everyone around you waits for the familiar ritual, a eulogy, a gesture, a soft voice saying the right thing. And so you lie, not out of cruelty, but out of necessity, out of expectation. At funerals, the truth is rarely invited. We speak in softened edges, in curated memories, in carefully chosen virtues. He was a good man. She loved without condition, even when we know, especially when we know, it wasn't always true. The lie becomes a kindness we offer to the living, or perhaps, to ourselves. Historical records from Victorian mourning customs reveal something odd. Pre-written eulogies circulated in books with blanks to be filled in, as if death itself required only the performance of remembrance, not the weight of it, not the whole truth, just the version that could be comfortably whispered in black lace and gloves. Maybe you lied at the funeral because saying nothing would have felt crueler. Or maybe the truth felt too jagged, too unfinished. You remembered the way they looked at you one last time, resentful, dismissive, distant. And yet, when asked to speak, you said they were kind. You said they always listened. You said they loved you. And now, it stays with you. That false sentence, that polite betrayal. The dead cannot argue, but your memory can. Your heart does. And sometimes, long after the flowers have withered and the guests have gone, you replay the moment, not because you wish you hadn't lied, but because you still don't know whether it was mercy or cowardice. Imagine someone telling you, after years of friendship, "I always envied you." The words might seem honest, even brave, but beneath their surface, something fractures. Because now, every shared joy feels questioned. Every compliment, every gesture of support is cast in a new, uncertain light. Jealousy is rarely loud. It doesn't arrive with shouting or visible anger. It's quiet, tucked behind polite smiles, buried beneath celebration. A friend might clap for your success, laugh at your stories, even help you rise higher, while privately aching under the weight of comparison. Not because they wish you harm, but because they feel left behind. History doesn't often record envy in friendships, but its traces are everywhere. In letters between scholars, where admiration hides resentment. In rival painters who praised each other's work while quietly measuring strokes. In childhood friends who grow apart, not from betrayal, but from silent competition, who got further, who was loved more, who seemed happier. When envy is finally confessed, it doesn't come as fire. It comes as a shadow. You begin to re-examine moments once cherished. Was that encouragement sincere? Was that silence approval or a hidden wound? And yet, the confession also reveals something tender, that someone cared enough to compare, to wish they had what you had. It may not heal what's shaken, but it shows where the hurt began. There's something sacred about the moment you choose to save someone. It's supposed to be pure, an offering without price. But what happens when that gesture is revisited, reinterpreted? When the rescuer says, "I regret saving you," a sentence that does more than undo the act. It transforms the memory into a weapon. Imagine a night, years ago, when you were standing at the edge, not metaphorically, but literally, and someone reached for you, pulled you back, sat with you in silence. Maybe they said nothing. Maybe they said, "You matter." And in that moment, you did. But now, that same person looks you in the eyes and says, "I shouldn't have." Suddenly, the entire shape of that memory changes. The warmth becomes cold. Gratitude curdles into guilt. What was once a miracle becomes a mistake, and you're no longer the one who was saved, but the burden that followed. It doesn't take shouting to deliver this kind of cruelty. Just a quiet shift in tone, a glance that avoids, a sigh too heavy. Because regret doesn't need volume. It only needs time to ferment. You begin to question your worth, not just now, but retroactively. You rewrite yourself as someone who shouldn't have been saved, who somehow didn't justify the cost of their existence. And so the act of sacrifice, once noble, becomes a debt ledger, not because you asked for saving, but because someone decided that their gift was wasted. And that knowledge doesn't free you, It binds you to a moment you can't fix, a kindness you didn't request, now held against you like a silent invoice. You're exactly like them. At first, it sounds like any other accusation, but then it lingers. It sticks in the air, not as a shout, but as a slow, unsettling truth, because it's not just a comparison, it's a dismantling. We spend our lives trying to define who we are, through choices, through habits, through quiet rebellions against the people who once shaped us. Parents, ex-lovers, old bullies, those who controlled, abandoned, hurt. To hear that we've become like them, that is not just criticism, it's identity collapse. Imagine a person who vowed never to be cruel, who promised themselves they'd always listen, always protect, and then one day, they raise their voice, they withdraw affection, they walk out mid-argument, and the words come, "You're exactly like him, like her, like them," and something inside folds, because maybe it's true. The power of this sentence lies not in anger, but in its mirror. It forces someone to see themselves through the lens of the past they swore they'd never echo. A daughter hearing she's like the mother who never apologized. A partner compared to the one who once broke them. A son told he carries his father's temper. It's not just painful, it's disorienting. Even if the resemblance is small, a tone of voice, a dismissive gesture, the accusation plants a seed. And now, every action is examined, every response second-guessed. The identity once worn with certainty becomes fragile, like a mask cracking at the edges. Sometimes, the words are unfair. Sometimes they're true, but either way, they force a reckoning. Because to be told you're like them isn't just an insult, it's a quiet undoing. A shadow pulled over who you thought you were. Imagine two people sitting across from each other at the dinner table. The light is soft, the food untouched, the silence thicker than words. One of them speaks, and the sentence arrives like a slow collapse. I only stayed for pity, not anger, not betrayal, just the soft unveiling of something long suspected but never confirmed. The relationship had ended long before, it just hadn't been pronounced dead. This isn't the kind of pity that sparks kindness. It's the quieter kind, the sense of obligation that wears the mask of care. When one person keeps showing up not out of love, but because leaving would make them feel cruel. So they stay. They cook the meals, remember the birthdays, offer hollow reassurances, all while mourning a connection that no longer stirs their heart, and the other person senses it. Not clearly, not all at once, but in glimpses. The way the hugs feel more like gestures. The way conversations drift without anchoring. The way eye contact avoids what both of them already know. Love has become a memory. And pity, though softer than hatred, can be just as cruel. Because it pretends to be affection. It preserves the performance, long after the curtain should have fallen. When someone admits they stayed out of pity, they don't just end a relationship. They erase the meaning of the months or years spent trying to hold it together. The partner left behind must now reframe every gesture, every sacrifice, every shared silence. Was any of it real? Or was it just charity dressed up as care? It's a quiet devastation. Not loud, not dramatic, just the slow unraveling of dignity. Because nothing stings more than realizing you weren't loved, you were endured. There are thoughts we never speak aloud, not because they're rare, but because they're sacred in their silence. I imagined your death, a sentence not born from hate, nor always from grief. Sometimes it's just curiosity, a flicker in the mind when you're staring at someone you love, and your mind slips where it shouldn't. You picture the phone call, the stunned silence, the trembling hands, the arrangement of shoes at the door after everyone's left. You imagine their face, peaceful maybe, or contorted. You wonder what you'd feel, relief, collapse, a hollow that echoes forever. It's not a wish, it's not a plan. It's a mental rehearsal for the unthinkable. In medieval monasteries, monks were trained to contemplate death daily, not just their own, but the deaths of those around them. It was meant to prepare the soul, to detach the ego, to tame grief before it ever arrived. But even they admitted a danger. The practice could stir darker waters. Not acceptance, but obsession. Imagine yourself watching someone speak, laugh, sleep, and then, for a second, the world shifts, and you see it without them. Not to savor the absence, but to survive it, to make sense of what you'd be without their orbit. But once the thought exists, it lingers. And if you ever said it out loud, I imagined your death, you risk reshaping the world. You name a future that hasn't arrived, yet now lives in shadow. A door opens, you can't close it. And though you meant no harm, you've changed something. Not in them, in you. Imagine hearing someone say, you were just convenient. Not angry, not cruel, just final. It's not a sentence that wounds in sharp bursts. It empties. It drains color from memory. Suddenly, every moment you thought was special becomes a matter of timing, not meaning. Not love, but location. The phrase doesn't accuse, it reduces. It takes your presence in someone's life and translates it into geography, availability, proximity. You weren't chosen. You were simply there. Close enough. Easy enough. Familiar enough. History is filled with relationships born not from passion, but from convenience. Marriages arranged to secure land, friendships forged by shared classrooms or routines, bonds formed not out of depth, but out of habit. And though they may grow, may even resemble love, they carry a quiet, haunting question. If I hadn't been near, would I have mattered at all? To be called convenient is to be unchosen, not disliked, but never truly seen. You were the placeholder, the stepping stone, the one they leaned on because you were already standing next to them. And once the words are spoken, they reach backward. That spontaneous laugh you shared, recast as circumstantial. That comforting hug, merely accessible. It doesn't hurt like betrayal. It hurts like deletion. The story you thought you were in no longer includes you as a central character. But maybe the deeper pain is this. You still remember it as love. They only remember it as timing. I don't believe you. 4 words that don't just challenge a statement, they unravel the entire foundation beneath it. When spoken, they don't float gently into the air. They drop like a stone into still water, disturbing everything around them. Suddenly, the conversation isn't about facts or stories. It's a courtroom. And you are no longer a person. You are a defendant. Imagine saying something simple, an experience, a memory, a feeling. Maybe you tell someone that you were hurt, that you tried, that you cared, and instead of comfort, you're met with doubt. Not outright accusation, just disbelief. A pause, a glance away, a question that asks too much, that subtle silence where validation should be. When someone says, I don't believe you, they don't just doubt your words. They doubt your lens, your memory, your sense of what is real. And that's where the erosion begins. Even if you were honest, even if you are right, the doubt sticks. It repeats itself in your head later. Maybe I overreacted. Maybe I made it up. Maybe I deserved it. It's a sentence that feels like protection for the speaker, but punishment for the listener. Because trust isn't about getting every detail right. It's about being believed even when you can't prove it. And when someone withdraws that trust, they don't just guard themselves, they isolate you. Over time, the fear of not being believed can become stronger than the pain itself. You begin editing your own story, not to deceive, but to be heard. And in doing so, you slowly stop being honest, not with others, but with yourself. I love someone else. The sentence doesn't tremble. It doesn't weep. It lands with precision, cold, clean, absolute. It doesn't just end love, it amputates it. No matter how gently it's spoken, it always cuts. Because it doesn't offer repair or redemption. It offers a replacement. You are no longer the center of someone's gravity. You're the past tense of their devotion. There is no negotiation, no plea to try harder. Just the quiet finality of being left behind for a heart that beats elsewhere. Imagine sitting across from someone you built years with. You shared grocery lists, illnesses, dreams half fulfilled. And then suddenly, You're not looking into the eyes of your partner. You're looking at a stranger confessing their exit. The room is still familiar, but nothing in it belongs to you anymore. And the worst part isn't even the betrayal. It's the calmness, the absence of anger. As if your chapter has simply ended in their story, and another has already begun. Your pain feels inconvenient to them now, something they've already outgrown. You replay everything, the last hug, the unanswered text, the way their voice started changing, softer with someone else, distant with you. And then the words arrive, not shouted, not wept, just stated, "I love someone else." It doesn't echo like a fight. It settles like dust, thick and permanent. You don't bleed, you hollow. Because there's no villain in this ending, just the unbearable truth that love, when it moves on, doesn't always look back. Imagine a quiet room, dimly lit by a lamp that hums softly in the corner. Someone sits on the edge of the bed, shoulders curled inward, hands loosely clasped. They've been spoken to, not shouted at, not scolded, but told something that didn't arrive like an argument. It arrived like a verdict. You're broken beyond repair. The sentence doesn't echo. It sinks, not like a knife, but like a weight chained to the chest. It's not a suggestion, not an invitation to change. It's final. It says, stop trying. It says, you are no longer a project worth rebuilding. This is where language becomes its own kind of violence, not through volume, but through precision. Because when someone says you're beyond repair, they are not pointing to a wound. They are denying you the right to heal. It's not about what you've done or how much you've struggled. It's about reducing your complexity into a hopeless label. And once spoken, it's hard not to internalize. You begin to see yourself differently, not as someone surviving, but as someone disqualified from redemption. Every small failure starts to feel like confirmation. You pull away from people, not because they reject you, but because you assume they will. Shame becomes your second skin. And worst of all, part of you starts to believe they were right. But the truth, if there is one, is quieter. No human being is a static object. No story is ever truly over until we stop listening. Yet when someone you trusted tells you that you are irreparable, they're not just declaring something about you. They're declaring the limits of their own empathy. Not everyone can hold space for brokenness. Some people need you to be whole to love you, and when you're not, they call it your failure, not theirs. Some truths don't bruise with impact. They dissolve you slowly, like fog lifting to reveal you were never really there. I never noticed you. The words arrive quietly, almost kindly, but their weight is devastating, because they don't mean, I forgot you. They mean you were never real to them at all. You might remember the details, what they wore, the way their laugh curved at the edges, the time they touched your arm, and the electricity it sent through your ribs. But to them, you were background, scenery, the blur behind their more important moments. Imagine being a child at school, watching someone from across the lunch table. You practice your jokes. You hope they'll ask to borrow your pencil. You try to be useful, memorable, kind. And years later, when you say, "Do you remember me?" they squint. They hesitate, then smile gently and say, "Oh, I'm sorry. I don't think I do." In ancient court records from forgotten kingdoms, there are names of servants, scribes, stable boys, dutiful, present, unnoticed. They left behind signatures, receipts, faint traces of a life lived in the shadows of someone else's story. Their presence mattered only in how it supported someone more visible. You might replay every shared glance, every word spoken. You might search for proof that you mattered, but the sting of "I never noticed you" isn't about memory. It's about hierarchy, about realizing that the closeness you felt was only ever one-sided. You were never part of their inner orbit. You were a passerby, a silent witness. And now, the silence is all that remains. Imagine standing in a room heavy with silence, where every breath feels borrowed, every eye is waiting for meaning. You step forward, paper in hand, voice trembling, not with grief, but with guilt. Because the words you're about to read, meant to honor a life, weren't born from memory. They came from a search bar. I wrote that eulogy from Google. A confession like that doesn't just disappoint, it desecrates. Not because the words were bad, but because they weren't yours. They weren't shaped by shared glances, private jokes, or silent forgiveness. They were lifted, sanitized, generic, safe, meant to sound like mourning, but hollow where it matters most. Grief is one of the last sacred rituals we have. It asks for truth, not perfection. A cracked voice, a trembling sentence, even an awkward silence, these hold more honesty than borrowed poetry. A eulogy isn't about eloquence. It's about presence, about standing in the rubble of someone's absence and saying, I knew them, and they mattered. Throughout history, funerals have always invited imperfection. Ancient mourners tore their clothes, beat their chests, spoke in fragments, because grief is raw. To polish it too much is to lie. To admit the eulogy was copied is to admit the goodbye was staged. That in a moment calling for closeness, you chose distance. And what's worse, it cannot be undone. The dead cannot hear truth after silence. Some words don't just fail. They replace what should have been said with what was easiest to find. You're just like your abuser. It's not an observation. It's a sentence that detonates the soul. Because it doesn't accuse an action. It assigns a lineage. A resemblance that chains you to the very thing you've spent your life trying not to become. These words don't correct, they condemn. Imagine growing up in a house where the walls held more fear than warmth, where footsteps in the hallway made you flinch, where silence was louder than shouting, and as you grew, you made a silent vow, I will never become them. Every choice became a rebellion against that shadow. Every word you spoke, a careful calculation to sound unlike them. You studied your own anger. You apologized more than needed. You tried. And then one day, someone you love says it. You're just like them. In that moment, your whole structure collapses inward. All your efforts feel erased. You don't just question your actions, you begin to question your identity. Was the damage inside you all along? Are you doomed to inherit the very harm you escaped? The cruelty of that sentence lies in its permanence. It doesn't allow room for context, for growth, for pain that's still being processed. It reduces you to a reflection of someone else's violence. And worst of all, it places that reflection inside your own skin, where you can't ever truly escape it. So you live in a kind of exile from yourself, from your intentions, from the version of you that once believed you could be different, that you were different, but you are not your trauma's echo. You are not the fingerprints left on you by someone else's cruelty, and no one has the right to hand you a mask and call it your face. I feel nothing right now. It's not an outburst. It doesn't sting like anger or wound like blame, but somehow it's even harder to bear, because it's not rejection of a person. It's the absence of anything at all. No warmth, no sadness, no fight, just vacancy, declared aloud. When someone says this, it doesn't just describe their inner world, it casts a shadow across yours. You search their face, hoping for something, remorse, confusion, even irritation. But there's only stillness, and that stillness feels like being left alone in a room that once held music. Emotional presence, even when painful, at least means someone is still with you. But emotional absence? That's a kind of exile. You're still sitting beside them, but it's as if they've disappeared, retreated behind a wall you can't scale. Their voice is still there, their body's still there, but their self feels missing. Sometimes this numbness is honest, a temporary shutoff when the heart is overwhelmed, protecting itself from collapse. Sometimes it's long-term, a slow erosion of feeling that went unnoticed for months. And sometimes it's a sign of something deeper, burnout, depression, the quiet aftermath of too many unresolved things. But whatever the cause, the impact is the same. When someone you care about says, I feel nothing, you feel everything on their behalf. Confusion, fear, abandonment. You become a witness to an emotional vacancy that leaves no map, and still, they sit across from you, calm, blank, gone, but not gone. It's a silence that makes even love feel like a distant memory, echoing inside a house that no longer feels like home. Let me know which sentence you'd like to explore next. Picture a dim hallway, late at night. One person stands by the door, keys in hand. The other sits on the couch, unmoving, staring into the shadowed space between them. The sentence is short, 5 words, but it carries the weight of a door closing. I chose them over you. No raised voice, no justifications, just the final acknowledgement of a decision already lived. This isn't about a single moment. It's the echo of every small preference, every sidelong glance, every time someone else's needs were prioritized without explanation. You felt it long before it was said. The shift in attention, the quiet pull towards someone else's orbit. But hearing it out loud makes it real. It confirms that the bond you were clinging to had already frayed, slowly, silently, until only the ritual remained. What makes it cruel isn't just the betrayal, it's the clarity. The acknowledgement that love was measured, weighed, and found wanting. That someone looked at both lives and stepped away from yours. And in doing so, rewrote the story you thought you were writing together. You begin to question everything. Was their laughter genuine? Were the shared silences sacred or empty? The timeline fractures, and you search for signs that were always there, but buried in the hope that love was still mutual. The worst part is not the loss, it's the replacement. They didn't just leave, they left for someone. It wasn't absence, it was preference. And that kind of comparison lingers in ways even time can't easily erase. Some sentences don't wound because they're shouted. They wound because they are delivered gently, with the finality of someone who's already moved on. And what's left behind is not just grief. It's the unmistakable feeling that your chapter ended before you ever saw the last page. Some sentences don't just end a story. They erase it. I'm better off without you. It sounds like healing, like closure, like strength found after ruin. But beneath its surface, it carries a quieter violence. The suggestion that what once felt sacred was never needed at all. You hear it in breakups, in friendships gone cold, in family feuds that no longer ache. It doesn't mourn the loss, it rewrites the memory, as if your presence was a weight they finally shed, as if your love, your effort, your years were just clutter in their narrative, something they survived. In letters from post-war Europe, buried in the debris of shattered homes and burned-out chapels, there are entries like this. He left, said he's better off without the ghosts of who we used to be. No blame, just detachment. The kind of departure that doesn't slam the door, it simply walks out, lighter. Imagine yourself hearing those words, not shouted, not angry, just calm, final. You might search for evidence that you mattered. You might replay the laughter, the rituals, the fragile things that felt like roots. But the confession leaves little room for dignity. It doesn't just say goodbye, it invalidates the reason you ever said hello. Still, people move on. They build new chapters, they thrive, and sometimes you do too. But when I'm better off without you enters the air, it isn't just the end of connection. It's the denial that it was ever worth remembering. Imagine hearing it, not screamed, not whispered, but said plainly. I'm just using you. There's no apology attached, no softening of the edges, just a truth so cold, it freezes everything it touches. You weren't loved, you were useful. And now that usefulness is all that defines your worth in their eyes. To be used is not always visible. It can look like affection, sound like gratitude, even feel like intimacy. But beneath it all, there's an agenda, a quiet tally being kept. What can you offer? What do you provide? When will you be emptied? This dynamic isn't rare. It exists in friendships where support flows only one way, in relationships where presence is mistaken for love, in partnerships where one gives and the other simply takes, without shame, without effort, without depth. It's not mutuality, it's transaction. History is full of such arrangements. Artists used as muses, then discarded. Political spouses chosen for image, not connection. Even in ancient texts, alliances were often forged through manipulation disguised as care. Usefulness was currency, humanity optional. And yet, to say it out loud, "I'm just using you," isn't a confession. It's a declaration. It means the mask has fallen away, and the truth has stepped forward, unashamed. What hurts most isn't the manipulation. It's the clarity. Knowing that every moment shared was weighted, calculated, hollowed out of sincerity. You weren't chosen. You were convenient, not for who you are, but for what you could offer. It's not heartbreak. It's erasure, written in perfect honesty. Some truths don't just hurt. They rewrite the entire timeline. "You were a mistake" isn't a comment on a decision. It's a verdict on a life. It doesn't point to something you did, but to everything you are. It doesn't ask for change. It asks for erasure. Imagine tracing your life backwards. Each choice, each accident, each unexpected moment that led to you. Now imagine someone you trusted, looking at all of that and saying, "It shouldn't have happened." That you are not a miracle of chaos and chance, but a misstep in the story. That your name, your breath, your presence are the result of something that went wrong. These words don't arrive with shouting. They come in sighs, in glances exchanged when they think you're not looking. In stories told with your name conveniently left out. Sometimes it's said outright, sometimes only implied, but the message is the same. That the space you occupy was never meant for you, and the mind, fragile in its need to belong, starts folding itself to fit this new shape. You begin to see yourself as an error trying to correct itself. You apologize too quickly. You make yourself smaller. You stop asking for things. Not because you don't want them, but because some part of you believes you never had the right to begin with. But even a so-called mistake leaves echoes. You laughed. You wept. You noticed things others missed. You interrupted silence. And in doing so, you became a rhythm in someone else's world, however unintended. You are not a misprint. You are a page they didn't expect to read, but one that was written all the same. I laughed at your pain. There's no easy way back from that sentence. It doesn't bruise the surface. It bruises the bond itself. Because this isn't just betrayal. It's mockery. It's witnessing someone's moment of raw vulnerability and turning it into private comedy. Pain, when shared, becomes sacred. A confession. A reaching out. And when that reach is met not with comfort, but with laughter, it's more than rejection. It's erasure. The person in pain starts to question whether their suffering ever mattered in the first place, or if it was always just material for someone else's smirk. Imagine a moment where you opened up, not dramatically, but honestly. Maybe you spoke about something that still tightens your chest when you think of it, and the person across from you, a friend, a partner, someone you trusted, chuckled, dismissed it, reframed it as amusing. In that instant, the room doesn't just go quiet, it tilts. You don't just feel misunderstood, you feel humiliated. It's one thing to be hurt. It's another to be made into a joke. Sometimes the laughter isn't cruel, just careless, nervous, awkward, misplaced. But the damage is the same, because laughter, in the wrong moment, rewrites the memory. What once was sorrow becomes something absurd in their eyes. And now, even your pain doesn't belong to you anymore. Trust doesn't unravel all at once. Sometimes, it frays in quiet moments like this, when someone treats your wound like a punchline. And what lingers isn't just hurt. It's shame, a sense that maybe, just maybe, your suffering was never truly safe with them. Imagine two people sitting close, hands once intertwined, laughter once shared like a secret language. There had been warmth, or at least the shape of it, memories layered with meaning. But now, one of them speaks, and the words reframe everything. I only wanted revenge. The sentence doesn't just land, it rewrites. It travels backward in time, staining every tender moment with suspicion. Every smile, every whispered promise, now feels like choreography. And what had seemed like love now flickers with calculation. This isn't the kind of revenge that shouts. It's quieter, more methodical. It wears affection like a disguise. It studies your weaknesses under the pretense of care. And when the mask finally slips, you realize the relationship was never mutual. It was an elaborate response to an invisible injury you didn't even know you caused. But revenge like this doesn't thrive on justice. It thrives on proximity. It needs closeness to do its damage. So the one who sought it pretends perfectly. They learn your rhythms. They memorize your needs. They stay, not because they love, but because they want their absence to devastate you when it comes. The aftermath is disorienting. You question not just them, but yourself. Were you naive? Were you a fool? Or were you simply too open to believe that cruelty could take the shape of care? And yet, in their admission, something breaks, more than trust. The past no longer belongs to you. It has been reauthored. The moments you once held sacred are now weaponized memories, fragments of a performance you didn't know you were watching. What you grieve isn't just the person, it's the illusion that you were ever truly loved and not simply used as a stage for someone else's vengeance to feel complete. It's easy to love someone when they're struggling, when their light hasn't outshone yours, when their dreams still feel manageable, familiar. But when they begin to rise, something in you shifts, quietly, shamefully. I prayed you'd fail. You never said it aloud. You clapped when they succeeded. You offered encouragement, advice, presence. But beneath the surface, you rooted for their stumble, not out of cruelty, but because their success exposed something raw in you. A mirror tilted at the wrong angle. In ancient plays from Greece and Japan, envy was portrayed not as fury, but as silence, a tightening of the eyes, a pause before applause, and always the same undertone, why not me instead? Even among friends, admiration can curdle into quiet resentment when one begins to outgrow the other's shadow. Imagine watching someone walk into the life they dreamed of, the job, the love, the applause, and instead of celebrating, you whisper into the dark corners of your mind, let them trip. Just once. Let them know what it's like to be unseen again. You hate the thought. But it's there. And worse, you feel relief when they falter. Later, you justify it. Say it was just insecurity or fear. You tell yourself it didn't mean anything. But that wish, you felt it. You sent it. You lived with it. And it stains the way you remember them and the way you remember yourself. Because to wish someone's failure is to abandon them quietly, while still pretending to hold their hand. Imagine giving someone years of your life, time, care, belief, only to find out you were never the first choice. You were my backup plan. It sounds almost casual, but the impact is irreversible. It doesn't just hurt, it redefines everything. You weren't the dream, you were the safety net, the contingency, the one they settled for when the ideal didn't work out. This isn't a betrayal of action. It's a betrayal of meaning, because the moments you thought were anchored in love now float, unmoored. Every kiss becomes a compromise, every shared goal, a second draft of a life they once imagined with someone else. The idea of a backup stretches far beyond romance. It appears in friendships too, where someone only calls when others don't pick up. In careers, where loyalty is rewarded not with recognition, but with replacement, the moment a better option appears. Even in family, some children grow up feeling like the spare, not the center. Always good enough, if the favorite fails. To be someone's fallback is to exist in the shadow of a fantasy you'll never replace. You weren't chosen, you were defaulted to. And once that truth is spoken, it stains memory itself. The laughter, a placeholder for someone else's imagined smile. The love, conditional, deferred, settled. It's not the loss of a relationship, it's the loss of your role in their story. You weren't the main chapter. You were the footnote they never meant to highlight. And now that you know, you can't unknow it. I just wanted control. Spoken plainly, it sounds almost harmless, like the admission of someone trying to organize chaos. But beneath those words is a quieter truth. That what looked like care, like guidance, like protection, was really about power. Control rarely shows up as force. It arrives dressed as concern, as, I just want what's best for you, as, I'm doing this because I love you. And when it's woven into affection, it's hard to question. You don't see the cage because it's padded with compliments. You don't notice the strings because they've been made invisible over time. Imagine a room where the light is always adjusted for you, the curtains drawn, the volume of your voice monitored. At first, it feels comforting. Someone is watching over you. But then, one day, you reach for the window and realize you don't know how it opens. When someone finally admits, I just wanted control, it doesn't just expose their intentions, it rewrites your memories. You start to doubt your freedom in moments you once thought were your own. Did you choose that job, that partner, that path? Or were those choices softly sculpted for you through praise withheld, affection rationed, consequences implied? And yet, perhaps the hardest part is this, that even now, you may still seek their approval. That the pattern, once learned, doesn't loosen just because the strings were shown. You might still hear their voice in your mind when you speak too loudly, want too much, step too far out of the lines they once drew. But awareness is its own quiet revolution. And though control can mimic care, care without freedom is not love, it is choreography. You were never meant to be someone's performance. I never found you attractive. It's not a shout. It rarely needs to be, because the quiet delivery of it is what makes it so cutting, more than just a rejection of appearance. It feels like a betrayal of the body someone brought to you day after day, thinking it was wanted. Attraction isn't everything, we're told. That love is deeper, emotional, intellectual, spiritual. But when someone confesses they never desired you, not once, not really, it doesn't just sting. It retroactively rewrites every moment you thought you were seen. You remember the times you got dressed slowly, wondering if they'd notice. The moments you reached out at night and they turned slightly away. The compliments that always came with a pause. You had explanations. Stress, fatigue, routine. But now, the truth arrives. And it sounds like this. I was never drawn to you. I just stayed. It feels like a kind of undoing. Because you didn't change. You didn't fall from grace. You were never in the light to begin with. Every embrace now feels suspect. Every kiss, rehearsed. Every silence reinterpreted as avoidance rather than comfort. Sometimes this confession comes with honesty, even kindness. They might say, I loved you in other ways, but love without desire, especially when kept secret, feels like being offered shelter in a house that never planned to warm you. You lived there, but the fire was always fake. And now you question not just them, but yourself. Was your body wrong? Did your face repel? Or was it simply something unspoken? A mismatch? A quiet incompatibility dressed in politeness? The answer doesn't always come. But the sentence remains, not cruel, not angry, just bare. And from then on, every mirror feels like it's listening. Picture a quiet conversation between two people who've known each other for years. One leans in slightly, their voice calm, almost tender. No anger, no edge, just a simple confession. I wanted your life. It doesn't sound like a threat. It sounds like truth. But the moment it's spoken, something shifts. A silent tension enters the space between them. Because to say those words aloud is to admit that beneath all the warmth, there was longing. Comparison. Envy that wore a friendly face. It starts small. Admiration disguised as praise. The way you speak, the way others listen to you, the ease with which you carry yourself. At first, it flatters. It feels good to be seen. But over time, the compliments begin to feel less like appreciation and more like inventory. A quiet audit of everything you have that they feel they don't. And then, the turning point. When they no longer want to learn from you, they want to be you. Your decisions, your relationships, your rhythm of existence, it becomes their mirror. And with that mirroring comes a subtle resentment. as if your mere existence is a reminder of what they couldn't claim. The moment they admit it out loud, everything retroactively changes. Every shared success, every moment of support now carries an aftertaste. Was it celebration, or was it surveillance? Was it closeness, or was it quiet rivalry? To want someone's life is human, but to say it, to voice it, is to lay bare a fracture that can never be unseen. Because suddenly, every interaction feels tinged with competition, and the safety of the bond you thought was mutual now feels like a stage where roles were chosen, and you were the character they longed to replace. There's a kind of pain that doesn't sting, it humiliates. I pretended to care, not because you were unworthy of comfort, but because I didn't have the energy to mean it. So I nodded at the right moments. I asked how you felt. I mirrored sorrow like an actor reciting grief from a page I never read. Empathy becomes theater when we fear what silence might reveal, and sometimes pretending to care feels kinder than being honest. But beneath the performance, something rots. You start to forget where the mask ends and the face begins. In 18th century letters from dying patients to their physicians, there are moments where compassion slips. A nurse signs a note with, "He passed quietly," yet her diary confesses, "I felt nothing. I just wanted it to be over." These weren't cruel people. They were tired, overwhelmed, hollowed out by too many rehearsals of care. Imagine sitting beside someone unraveling. You offer your presence, your eyes, your voice. But inside, you're counting the minutes. You rehearse your exit. You fake softness like it's a script you've memorized too well. And later, they thank you for being there, for listening, for understanding. And something inside you shrinks because you know it wasn't real. Pretending to care doesn't always come from malice. Sometimes it's defense. Sometimes it's habit. But when exposed, it unravels more than trust. It strips the dignity from pain, revealing how easily comfort can be forged, and how deeply it wounds when it is. Imagine trusting someone deeply, sharing your plans, your dreams, your quiet hopes, never knowing that behind your back, they were slowly undoing you. Not with a dramatic strike, but with 1,000 invisible cuts. "I sabotaged you quietly" isn't just a confession. It's the unmasking of a secret war waged in silence. Quiet sabotage doesn't look like betrayal. It looks like hesitation when you're mentioned in a room, a forgotten message, a missed opportunity that never quite reaches you. They didn't scream. They didn't confront. They simply interfered, gently, subtly, often with a smile. Throughout history, betrayal rarely needed noise. In royal courts, power was eroded not by open rebellion, but whispered rumors, altered letters, withheld information. The most dangerous enemies wore familiar faces, not because they hated, but because your success threatened something they couldn't name. To admit to quiet sabotage is to reveal something colder than anger. It says, "I watched you struggle, and I let it happen. I may have even helped, not out of justice, not out of revenge, but out of quiet resentment, buried jealousy, or the need to stay above you." And once confessed, everything changes. You revisit the missed chances, the confusing rejections, the strange silences, and they all align. The pattern emerges. You weren't unlucky. You were targeted, softly, repeatedly. The wound isn't just betrayal. It's the time spent believing you were safe. "I forgot your birthday on purpose." It sounds like a slip, an oversight, but it isn't. It's a message wrapped in silence, a way of saying you don't matter without ever raising a voice. It's not about the date on the calendar. It's about absence used as punctuation. A full stop where affection used to be. Forgetting by accident is human, but forgetting intentionally? That's quiet warfare, a withholding of recognition, a decision not to see you, to let the day pass like any other, knowing it isn't. It's a slow, calculated way to diminish someone without confrontation, because forgetting can't be argued with. You can't prove neglect. You can only feel it. Imagine checking your phone. Nothing. Not even a message that came late. No mention the next day. Not even an apology. Just an echoing silence that confirms what you suspected but hoped wasn't true. That someone who once knew you, your rhythms, your rituals, chose to step around your joy as if it were a puddle to avoid. And the wound isn't always visible. It's not about the cake or the candles. It's about being deliberately unremembered, being edited out of someone's emotional calendar. When love fades, it often doesn't scream. It forgets, strategically, just enough to remind you that warmth is no longer guaranteed. But here's the cruel paradox. Even in neglect, you are still being thought of. They remembered. They simply chose not to show it. Because sometimes, the intention behind silence is louder than any word. I thought you'd give up. It sounds simple, almost harmless. But when said aloud, it settles into the bones like cold. Because it doesn't just expose doubt, it confirms it. And for the person hearing it, it affirms every silent fear they've ever carried about not being enough. We all walk through life with hidden questions. Do they believe in me? Do they think I'll make it? We look to those close to us not just for comfort, but for quiet assurance that our struggle is not invisible. So when someone admits they assumed you'd fail, it's more than disappointment. It's disorientation. You begin to wonder how long they've been waiting for you to fall. The weight of this sentence isn't in its volume, it's in its history. It implies observation, that they watched you stumble, watched you hesitate, and quietly concluded you wouldn't survive it. Maybe they smiled anyway, maybe they nodded in support. But beneath it all was a quiet, folded assumption that you'd eventually break. Sometimes it comes from a parent, sometimes a friend, sometimes a partner who, without realizing, planted their hope in your defeat just to avoid being surprised by it. They didn't want to be let down, so they lowered their expectations. And now you learn they were never really walking beside you. They were walking behind, waiting for you to stop. You don't always respond. Sometimes there's no response that fits, just a quiet realization that love, support, belief, these things aren't guaranteed, and that sometimes the hardest battles are fought not against the world, but against the people who quietly bet against you. Imagine someone telling you, not in anger but with quiet honesty, I tried to replace you. No raised voice, no dramatic pause, just a calm confession that lands like an erasure. In that moment, you're no longer a memory. You're a role, a space to be filled, a presence that once mattered, but was, apparently, interchangeable. They don't always mean it cruelly. Often it comes from pain, from absence that felt unbearable. They wanted comfort, familiarity. So they found someone who laughed like you, who walked like you, who made the same kind of coffee in the morning. They recreated rituals and pretended it was healing, but every attempt to replace you only made your absence more vivid. The silhouette was close, but the substance was wrong. Still, the trying is what lingers, because to replace someone is to believe they weren't singular, that what made them matter was replicable, that love, memory, intimacy, all of it, could be reassembled with different parts. You begin to question your own meaning. Was it your presence they missed, or just the convenience of it? Were you cherished or just useful? And if you could be replaced once, could you be replaced again? There's a quiet violence in the idea that we are substitutable. It strips away the sacredness of connection. It says, you were never the reason. I just needed someone there. And when spoken aloud, this truth doesn't just end a relationship. It rewrites the story that came before. Because now, even the love that once felt personal begins to feel like a script waiting for a new actor. The pain isn't in the loss. It's in the realization that while you were holding something sacred, they were already scanning for the nearest resemblance. There's a quiet violence in being ignored. No slamming doors, no cruel words, just silence that grows heavier with every hour. I never read your messages, not because I couldn't, not because I didn't see them, but because I chose to let them sit, unopened, untouched, until they became something less than real. Maybe you wrote with trembling fingers. Maybe you poured your heart out late at night, trusting the blue light to carry your words somewhere safe. Apologies, confessions, fragments of hope. each one crafted carefully, desperate to be heard. But on the other end, nothing, not even a glance. In ancient archives from wartime Europe, there are bundles of unopened letters, soldiers who died before they could read them. Or worse, soldiers who lived but chose not to. Letters from mothers, lovers, children, still sealed. The pain they held was too much to touch, or too inconvenient to matter. Imagine yourself realizing that everything you said, all your vulnerability, all your reaching, was never received. Not because the line was broken, but because the listener turned away. And somehow, that neglect wounds deeper than anger ever could. It whispers that your voice wasn't even worth the effort of refusal. Unread messages don't just fade, they ferment. And the silence they're met with becomes louder than any rejection. Because when someone says, "I never read your messages," what they mean is, "I saw your need, and I left it unanswered." Imagine reuniting with someone after time apart, expecting warmth, nostalgia, maybe even tears. But instead, you're met with calm indifference. No longing in their eyes, no ache in their voice, just the quiet truth. "I didn't miss you." It's not shouted. There's no cruelty in the tone. But the words land with finality. You were absent, and it made no difference. The calls left unmade, the days passed in silence. They weren't signs of restraint, they were signs of peace. This isn't anger, it's detachment. And that's what makes it harder to bear, because we don't fear being hated. We fear being unneeded, unfelt. In past centuries, letters between separated lovers were filled with aching prose, longing folded into every page. The distance was something to endure, to suffer through. To miss someone was proof of love. But when absence becomes relief, not pain, what then? What was all of it built on? To say, "I didn't miss you," is to admit that time moved forward without hesitation, that the days felt lighter, that nothing inside paused to look back. And in that moment, you realize missing someone is not a guarantee. It's a choice, a measure of meaning. And when it's absent, so is the bond you thought was still alive. You don't need storms to end a connection. Sometimes, all it takes is silence, and the quiet realization that it never echoed. I fantasized a different life. It sounds harmless. Everyone dreams, right? Of other places, other versions of themselves. But when spoken aloud, this admission becomes something else. Not a daydream, but a quiet betrayal. Because buried inside it is a truth rarely named, that the life being lived wasn't enough. Fantasies are private windows. They let you peek into worlds where choices were different, timing was kinder, or love felt more certain. They start innocently, in traffic, in long showers, in the moments before sleep. But when the fantasy persists, it becomes a parallel world, one that begins to feel more vivid than the one you're in. Imagine sitting at a dinner table. You nod, you smile, you say all the right things, but your mind has wandered again. In your imagined life, maybe you never said yes to this town. Maybe you married someone else. Maybe you never married at all. And when the person across from you asks, "What are you thinking about?" you say, "Nothing." Because how do you admit that your heart is spending more time in a life that doesn't exist? Saying it aloud, "I fantasized a different life," burns something subtle. It doesn't destroy love instantly, but it introduces doubt, not just in them, but in you. Are you loyal to this moment, or just tolerating it while your mind rehearses an escape? And yet, maybe that imagined life isn't about wanting someone else. Maybe it's about wanting to feel like yourself again, to recover the parts that got buried in the daily compromises. But once said, the truth lingers in the air. Because the moment you confess a dream of elsewhere, the place you stand no longer feels like home. "I wanted you gone." The sentence doesn't raise its voice. It doesn't need to. It arrives like a final breath after a long-held silence. Not a burst of anger, but a quiet truth that's been building behind the eyes for months, or maybe years. To want someone's absence is one thing. People think that all the time, in passing, during arguments, under stress. But to say it aloud, to form the words and release them, is different. It's not a request for space. It's not frustration spoken in the heat of a moment. It's an exorcism, a purging of their emotional presence from your inner world. And when you're the one it's said to, the world shifts slightly. Because what you hear isn't just rejection. You hear the untold story behind the sentence, the nights they lay awake hoping you'd leave on your own, the rehearsed conversations that never happened, the countdown they started silently while still sitting next to you, pretending things were fine. It's not always dramatic. Sometimes it's said in stillness, at a kitchen table, in the car. After a long pause, that means more than the words themselves. And when you hear it, your memory starts unraveling. You go back through old moments, looking for signs. Was this when they started pulling away? Did I miss it? Did I make it worse? What lingers isn't just pain, it's displacement. A sudden awareness that your presence, your voice, your habits, your very being had become something unwelcome. Not because of one mistake, but because of something quieter. A fading, a misalignment, a love that no longer had room to breathe. And now, with the words spoken, the room feels emptier. Not because they're gone, but because, somehow, you already are. Picture a moment thick with emotion. One person breaking down, eyes red, voice trembling, breath caught between sobs. The other sits nearby, watching, not cruel, not dismissive, just still. And in that stillness lies the most unbearable truth. They felt nothing, no surge of empathy, no ache in the chest, just silence, inside and out. When they say, "I felt nothing when you cried," they are not admitting to indifference. They are confessing to a loss of connection so deep it hollowed them out from the inside. This isn't about coldness, it's about disconnection. The slow drift away from feeling, the erosion of care that doesn't always come with anger. It often comes with numbness. A quiet fading of the bond that once made another person's pain feel like your own. It happens gradually. One unspoken resentment, one unresolved conflict, one unmet need at a time. And when that final moment comes, when someone you once loved breaks down in front of you, vulnerable and raw, and nothing stirs in you, it's not strength, it's not detachment, it's the death of shared humanity. You've become a mirror with no reflection. The person crying feels it too. Not just the pain of what made them weep, but the deeper sting of knowing their sorrow didn't move you, that their emotions spilled out into a space that no longer received them, that your silence wasn't patience, it was absence. To witness someone's heartbreak and feel nothing is to admit that something essential has died between you. And in that quiet, unbearable space, both people realize, maybe at different speeds, that something sacred will never return. We think memory is a mirror, clear, honest, untouched. But memory is clay, soft, malleable, vulnerable to regret and pride. I rewrote our story. Not all at once, just in small revisions. I softened the endings, changed the lighting, cast myself in a better role. And somewhere along the way, the real version slipped away. In my version, I was patient. You were unpredictable. I gave more. You faded. I removed the parts where I said too much, ignored your needs, or used silence as punishment. I kept the parts that made me seem noble, wounded, misunderstood. Because it's easier to live with fiction than to face the full truth. Victorian novelists once revised published love letters before releasing them to the public, stripping out bitterness, rewriting affection, polishing betrayal into misunderstood passion. Even then, the impulse was the same. Let the record show something kinder than what truly happened. Imagine that waking up years later, telling someone about us, the way we laughed, the way we ended, and not realizing how much I've reshaped it, how I made myself the hero of a story you may have told very differently, because memory isn't shared, it's possessed. And when I changed mine, I rewrote yours too, without asking. You might still carry the raw version, the one with uneven scenes and jagged moments, the one where I wasn't gentle. And now, Our stories no longer match, but I'll keep telling mine because it's the only one I can live with, even if it's not the one that's true. Imagine someone looking at you, not with anger, not with sadness, but with a strange calm, and saying, "You were easy to forget." Not because you hurt them, not because you mattered too much, but because, in their world, you barely left a trace. It doesn't feel like rejection. It feels like erasure, like you were never carved into their memory deeply enough to leave a scar. Like all the laughter, the nights spent talking, the quiet rituals you thought were significant, dissolved the moment you walked away. Forgetting isn't always gradual. Sometimes it's immediate, like a curtain pulled shut on a play that didn't quite move the audience. You might have rehearsed every scene, memorized every line, but they weren't watching with their heart. They were only passing time. History rarely records the forgettable. We remember the loud, the tragic, the beloved. But for every epic romance, there are 1,000 quiet entanglements that disappear without record. You thought you were unforgettable, but to them, you were an intermission. And the pain of hearing "you were easy to forget" isn't about pride. It's about meaning. You wanted to be a chapter, maybe even a footnote. But now, you're not even a sentence they highlight in memory. Not hated, not mourned, just dismissed. I never said the truth. It doesn't shout. It doesn't beg for forgiveness. It simply settles into the room like dust you hadn't noticed before. A quiet revelation that redraws the borders of every memory, every conversation, every moment once trusted. Because when truth is withheld, even silence becomes a form of deceit. A life built without truth is not a home. It's a mausoleum. The walls look stable, even comforting. But inside, nothing grows. Love is rehearsed. Promises are made on hollow ground. And the person across from you, the one who believed, now realizes they were speaking to a version of you that never fully existed. Imagine hearing those words after years of shared history. Birthdays celebrated, illnesses endured, late-night confessions. And now you're told that under it all, the truth was never present. Not a specific lie, not one moment of betrayal, but the steady, deliberate absence of honesty. It reshapes everything in reverse. What once felt solid now feels scripted. The confession itself may come without drama. No tears, no dramatic collapse, just a simple sentence. And yet, it echoes backward. It inserts doubt into the spaces you thought were sacred. Was that love real? Were those words meant for you, or for the version of you they needed to believe in? When someone finally says, "I never said the truth," it doesn't end the story. It simply unmasks the fact that the story was never quite real. And what hurts most is not the lie itself, but the realization that all this time, you trusted a ghost wearing your name. I used your secrets. It's not just a confession, it's a rupture. Because secrets aren't just words, they are the softest parts of someone's life, offered with trembling trust, never meant to be carried into the light unless held with care. To hear that those pieces were used, not held, not protected, but used, is to realize that your most fragile moments were never truly safe. That your tears were noted not with empathy, but with strategy. That what you thought was sanctuary had a door left unlocked. Most betrayal is sharp. This one is cold. You remember the moments you confided in them. Maybe you whispered about a fear, a memory, a shame you hadn't told anyone else. And they nodded, said, "Thank you for trusting me." And for a while, you believed it mattered. You believed they'd guard it. But now, with the truth exposed, every shared moment starts to unravel. The way they brought up certain things in arguments, the subtle hints they dropped in front of others, the way they always knew how to wound you just right, not by accident, but with the map you gave them. This isn't just betrayal, it's the loudest form of it. Because they didn't just hurt you, they chose the most vulnerable version of you to hurt, and once that's happened, something inside seals shut, not out of anger, out of instinct. Because what was once a safe place became a trap. The secret once used doesn't go silent. It echoes, not just in your memory, but in the space between you now. You may forgive, you may forget, but some part of you, quiet, deep, remembers what it felt like to be unarmed in front of someone who brought a blade. Imagine sharing your worst moment with someone you trust, a dream that collapsed, a risk that didn't work out. You come to them raw, vulnerable, maybe even ashamed, and they comfort you. Soft words, a hand on your shoulder, the practiced sympathy of someone who seems to care. But later, or maybe much later, you hear the truth. I was glad you failed. It doesn't sound like rage. It doesn't even sound like jealousy anymore. It sounds like relief, spoken too calmly to be dismissed. And suddenly, all those past gestures, the encouragements, the reassurances, the quiet presence, fracture into performance. Because this admission doesn't just rewrite a moment, it rewrites a history. To take pleasure in someone's downfall is one thing, to say it is another. It reveals a rot that was there all along, hidden beneath nods of support, beneath words like, I'm proud of you, and you deserve this. You start to remember the subtle undermining, the hesitant applause, the way their praise always felt slightly off-key. Because failure for them wasn't just your struggle, it was their secret satisfaction, proof that you could be humbled, proof that they didn't fall behind, you just happened to fall too. And once spoken, the damage is irreversible. Even if they say they didn't mean it, the line has been crossed. Every success you once shared now feels tainted. Every vulnerable moment betrayed. You trusted them with your hurt, and they smiled, not out of kindness, but because it fed something small and bitter inside them. Sometimes, betrayal doesn't come with knives. Sometimes, it comes with the quiet joy someone felt when you fell apart. And once you know that, the repair isn't just hard, it's impossible. Some victories don't shine. They echo, hollow, quiet, wrong. I lied to win. I said what I needed to say, twisted the facts just slightly, left out the parts that didn't serve me. It worked. I was praised. I was chosen. But beneath the applause, something went still. You think the lie is small at first, just a shortcut, a softened truth, a tiny distortion to help the odds lean your way. But once the win arrives, it doesn't feel like yours. You carry it, but it doesn't carry you. It rattles. It reminds. In medieval tournaments, knights sometimes paid heralds to exaggerate their glories, fabricated duels, false claims of valor. And centuries later, their names live on. But behind those names are records of quiet shame, hidden retractions, contested songs. Because even then, the story mattered more than the truth. And some stories were bought. Imagine shaking someone's hand after a win you know you didn't earn cleanly. They smile, unaware. They admire you. Maybe they needed that victory more. Maybe they played fair. But the lie is buried now, too late to unearth without collapsing everything. So you thank them, and walk away, and carry it alone. The worst part isn't being found out. It's never being found out. Because then the lie becomes your legacy, the triumph, your curse. And every time someone celebrates your success, you hear a whisper underneath, this was never truly yours. Imagine someone saying it plainly, without anger or volume, just clarity. I don't respect you. It doesn't come as an insult. It comes as a conclusion. And suddenly, all the arguments you've won, the affection you've given, the loyalty you've offered, feel stripped of their weight. Respect is the invisible thread that holds even strained connections together. You don't need to like someone to respect them. You don't even need to agree with them. But once respect is gone, everything beneath it begins to sag. Trust, admiration, even love. There are people who stay in relationships long after love fades, but the moment respect dies, so does the foundation. It's why silence can be mended, but contempt rarely can. A sigh across the dinner table, an eye roll during a conversation. These are quiet symptoms of something deeper, the erosion of regard. In history, empires didn't just collapse from invasion, they fell from within. when rulers lost the respect of their people. In personal lives, it's no different. A parent who breaks promises, a partner who mocks instead of listens, a friend who belittles in disguise. The bond decays not from betrayal, but from steady devaluation. To hear, "I don't respect you," is to be told that your words no longer carry weight, that your presence doesn't inspire belief. It's not a wound that bleeds, it's one that silences. Because without respect, even love has nowhere to stand. "I took credit for you," it sounds like something small, a misattribution, a moment of silence when you should have spoken. But it's more than that. It's theft of the invisible kind, the kind that doesn't steal objects, but memory, effort, identity. When someone takes credit for you, they don't just claim what you did. They claim what you were, your long nights, your risks, the quiet moments you doubted yourself but still pressed forward, all of it, wrapped in their voice, their story, their name. And when they finally admit it, after the applause has faded, after the doors have closed, what they return isn't what they took. What they offer back is just truth, far too late to fix anything. Imagine building something carefully, word by word, hour by hour, and when it finally reaches the light, someone else steps into it, stands in it, smiles as if it were theirs, and everyone believes them because they got there first, louder, cleaner. And you watch your reflection appear in someone else's shadow. Saying "I took credit for you" isn't a confession. It's a delayed burial, a quiet erasure that now wears your face. The damage isn't only what was stolen, but what was never known to be yours. The chances you never got. The version of yourself you could have become if only someone had said, "That was theirs." And even when truth emerges, it rarely restores what was lost, because in the currency of recognition, timing is everything. And sometimes the echo of your effort is all that remains. "I replaced you instantly." The words aren't shouted. They don't need to be. Their power lies in their precision, in the way they remove every illusion you held about mattering. It's not just the end of a connection. It's the revelation that your memory had already expired before your goodbye was even spoken. Most of us want to believe we linger, that after we leave, something of us stays behind. Our scent in the sheets, our voice in the walls, our absence echoing in their routines. We imagine grief, delay, a pause that proves we were irreplaceable. But to be told otherwise, to hear that the vacancy was never even felt, that's emotional cruelty at its most surgical. You think back to the last moment you touched them, to the final conversation that didn't feel like an ending. And now you realize it already was. Not because of something you said, but because they had already moved on. Someone else had already entered the space you thought you still occupied. And it's not just about romance. Friends do this, families do this. One day you're essential, the next you're forgotten. And the replacement? It isn't always better. It's just easier, closer, quieter. Not you. That's what stings. Not that they moved on, but that they didn't hesitate. No struggle, no mourning, no second glance. You weren't grieved, you were swapped. And now, you're left not with heartbreak, but with erasure. The kind that makes you question whether you were ever seen at all, whether you were real in their life, or just a placeholder in the waiting room of their loneliness. Some things end slowly, some shatter. But this is just a clean deletion, and that, somehow, is the most brutal way to be left behind. Imagine someone you once meant everything to, someone whose life you entered not casually, but deeply. The late-night talks, the quiet rituals, the feeling that something real was unfolding between you. And then, years later, or maybe just months, you hear them say, "You were just a phase." The words don't sting like anger. They sting like erasure. A reclassification of everything you were into something temporary, transitional, disposable. Not a chapter, a detour, not a home, a waiting room. To be called a phase is to be stripped of depth. It means your presence wasn't defining. It was incidental. That your laughter, your pain, your quiet influence didn't shape them. They merely passed through you on the way to somewhere more permanent. And maybe, for them, that's true. Maybe you were the version of themselves they tried on while searching for the one they wanted to keep. But for you, it was real. You weren't performing a part. You were giving what you had, listening, showing up, remembering the little things. And now, all of it, every soft word, every hard goodbye, has been reduced to a footnote in their story. The worst part isn't just being forgotten, it's being recategorized as something they outgrew, as someone they needed only to get to who they were really meant to be. And you're left wondering, did they ever see you clearly, or were you just a placeholder? They blurred into memory the moment they moved on. To be called a phase is not to be hated, it's to be made small. And sometimes, that's the cruelest thing of all, because you weren't a mistake, you were a person, and you mattered, even if they no longer remember why. Some truths don't seek forgiveness, they aim to wound. I enjoyed hurting you, not in the beginning, not always, but somewhere along the path, pain became power. Watching you flinch meant I still mattered. Causing your silence meant I still had control. It wasn't loud, it was calculated. A delayed reply, a compliment withheld, an eye roll timed just right. Each act so small it could be denied. But I knew what I was doing. I knew which buttons were fragile, which words scraped deepest, and I pressed them anyway. In certain ancient punishment rituals, rulers didn't just sentence pain, they made it personal. They learned their enemies' fears, their wounds, their stories, because pain, when tailored, becomes theater. And I was no different. I didn't lash out blindly. I chose carefully. Quiet cruelty disguised as indifference. Imagine being the person on the receiving end, confused, hopeful, always trying to explain the hurt as misunderstanding. You thought I just didn't know, but I did. That's what made it satisfying. And now, saying it aloud doesn't cleanse me. It condemns me. Because this isn't a confession. It's an admission that I knew, that I liked it, that for a moment your suffering stitched something broken in me, and I let it. Imagine uncovering a betrayal, one that doesn't come with excuses of passion or revenge, but something far colder. I was just curious, not planned, not necessary, just tried on like a jacket to see how it felt, and in that moment, everything broken feels smaller than the reason it was broken for. Curiosity sounds harmless. It's what drives learning, exploration, invention. But when applied to people, to hearts, to trust, it becomes a scalpel in the wrong hands. Because some people don't destroy you out of need. They do it to see what would happen. In history, experiments weren't always done in labs. They happened in villages, in relationships, in war rooms. The cost of someone's curiosity was often someone else's suffering, a secret tested, a rule bent, a line crossed not to escape, but to observe. To say, I was just curious, is to strip betrayal of depth. It wasn't a mistake made in a moment of weakness. It was an act committed with just enough distance to feel blameless. There was no grand emotion, just a question. What if I did this? And you were the answer. The damage feels sharper because it was never about you. Not really. You weren't hated. You weren't even fully seen. You were a variable in their experiment, something to poke, prod, and walk away from once the reaction played out. Curiosity doesn't always come with cruelty, but it rarely comes with care. I thought you were pathetic, not screamed, not thrown like a weapon, just stated, calmly, plainly, as if it were the weather. That's the kind of cruelty that cuts deeper, because it doesn't come from rage, it comes from quiet dismissal, from a place that decided long ago you weren't worth the fire of anger. Disdain is a colder thing than hate. It doesn't explode, it curdles. It turns your gestures into comedy, your hopes into inconvenience. And when someone finally says it, I thought you were pathetic, what they really mean is, I saw you trying and I decided you were less. Imagine confiding in someone, opening up, revealing your uncertainties, your strange little dreams. You were vulnerable, thinking that meant safety, and maybe, in the moment, they nodded. They smiled. They stayed. But inside, they were cataloging your weakness, mistaking softness for failure, empathy for incompetence. And when it's revealed, maybe years later, the air shifts. You start to look back at every moment differently. The way they looked at you when you cried, the pauses in their praise, the jokes that landed just a little too hard. You weren't being held. You were being tolerated. To be pitied without consent is a kind of exile. It makes you question not only how they saw you, but how you saw yourself, because even now, a part of you wonders if they were right, if your pain was in fact small, if your effort really did look like flailing. But the truth is, cruelty doesn't need rage to be real. Sometimes, the softest voice delivers the harshest verdict, and long after it's spoken, you carry the echo, not of what you did, but of who they said you were. You were my distraction, not my partner, not my home, just a passing relief, a momentary noise to drown out a deeper silence. It doesn't sound angry, it sounds honest, and that's what makes it feel cruel. Because what this sentence reveals is that the connection you thought had depth, had meaning, was never meant to last. You weren't chosen. You were used, not out of malice, but out of need. A need to forget, to escape, to feel something softer than grief or quieter than chaos. And when that need passed, so did your purpose. Distractions aren't held on to, they're consumed. And to be told you were one is to realize you were never really seen, only projected onto. Your laughter, your attention, your presence, it filled a void. But it never built a future. It was never meant to. At first, it might sound flattering. You helped someone through something. You kept them afloat. But the weight of that sentence grows, because eventually, you realize they were never really with you. They were with the absence of someone else, or the pain of something they couldn't face. And now that they've healed, they've left the room, quietly, as if you were never really there, and you start to question everything. The way they looked at you, the late-night confessions, the way they held your hand when no one was watching. Were those real, or were they just symptoms of distraction, placeholders for a deeper longing that had nothing to do with you? To be someone's distraction is to be disposable, useful, but temporary. And when your purpose is fulfilled, your presence is no longer needed, not hated, not missed, just set down. And that's how you realize you weren't part of their story. You were just the space between chapters. Imagine a memory you thought was safe, a conversation etched into your mind, not because of what was said, but because of the calm with which it was delivered. You asked a question, vulnerable, open, trusting, and they looked you in the eye and answered. Steady voice, no hesitation, no flicker of guilt, just certainty. But now, much later, they tell you the truth. I lied to your face. It doesn't matter what the lie was, big or small, important or trivial. What matters is the intimacy of the betrayal. They were close enough to see the hope in your eyes and still chose to deceive you, not by omission, not by avoidance, but by construction. They built a sentence just for you, knowing it was false, and handed it to you as comfort. That's what makes it linger. The eye contact, the steady tone, the fact that in the moment you believed them completely. And now you replay it all in reverse, their body language, their phrasing, their stillness, wondering how you didn't see it, how they didn't flinch, how trust died right in front of you and you didn't notice. A lie told to your face is different than a lie whispered behind your back. It's surgical. It knows where to cut. And when revealed, it doesn't just make you doubt them. It makes you doubt yourself, your instincts, your memory, your ability to ever know what's real again. Because a lie like that doesn't just fracture the relationship, it poisons the foundation. And once that poison spreads, even silence feels suspect. Even kindness feels rehearsed. Some wounds fade, but the moment someone calmly lies to your face, you realize what you lost wasn't just truth. It was the idea that truth could even exist between you. Some feelings live like shadows, always present, never admitted, until one day they rise into words. I wanted your pain, not just indifference, not detachment, something darker, something deliberate, a hunger not for silence but for suffering, for you to feel what I felt, or worse. It didn't come from nowhere. It grew in the soil of betrayal, disappointment, humiliation, but it wasn't pure reaction. It was intent. I imagined you hurting. I fantasized about your face crumbling, your voice breaking, your certainty unraveling. I didn't just want distance, I wanted damage. In ancient mythologies, gods didn't just smite, they watched, they waited, they demanded offerings of suffering, as if pain itself were proof of loyalty. Some temples recorded rituals designed not to heal, but to punish. And when I think of that now, I see myself, not as the victim, but the altar. Imagine passing someone in the street, knowing they still trust you, still hope for mercy. And inside, you wish for their world to fall, not for justice, not for closure, just to see them small, diminished, shaken, their strength gone, their joy stolen. I wanted your pain isn't a moment of anger. It's a long, cold gaze into the part of yourself you usually keep chained. The part that whispers when no one's listening. The part that smiles when it shouldn't. And once the thought becomes a sentence, it stains. Because it doesn't just reveal who you hurt, it reveals who you've become. Imagine struggling, drowning in your own life, while someone you trust stands just close enough to see, but far enough to stay clean. And later, when the storm has passed, they admit it. I watched you sink, not because they couldn't help, but because they chose not to. There's a kind of betrayal that doesn't involve action. No sabotage, no lies, just stillness. A calculated distance. They heard the cracks in your voice. They saw the weight in your shoulders. They noticed the silences growing longer, the light dimming in your eyes. And they did nothing. This isn't neglect born of ignorance. It's neglect wrapped in observation. Like watching a building burn while holding the keys to the exit. There's no need to strike a match when you're willing to watch the fire spread. In ancient texts, betrayal was often marked by a kiss, a knife, a clear rupture. But modern cruelty hides in passivity. In people who let you fall, then say, I didn't know how to help. But the truth, when finally spoken, is harder. They didn't want to get involved. To confess, I watched you sink, is to claim the role of witness, not savior. But the line between the two is thin. And choosing to stand back when stepping forward was possible isn't neutrality. It's silent participation. Sometimes, the deepest wounds aren't carved by enemies, but by the hands that stayed folded while you went under. You were always temporary, not, it just didn't work out, not, things changed, but something colder, more final. A sentence that reframes everything you thought was building into something fleeting. When someone says it aloud, they don't just end a story, they reduce it. What you believed was a chapter becomes a layover, a pause on their way to somewhere else. And that's what stings most. Not that it ended, but that it was never meant to last. That while you were investing, they were already preparing for departure. That the things you etched in stone, they held in sand. Imagine the small, daily moments. The casual, see you soon. The inside jokes. The shared toothbrush. You thought they were signs of permanence. Roots taking hold. But to them, they were placeholders, comforts to pass the time. You weren't the destination, you were the waiting room. And when they say it, you were always temporary. It doesn't sound angry. It sounds tired, as if permanence had never been part of the plan. And somehow, that makes it worse, because it means the expiration date was there from the start. You just never saw it. So now, you look back and wonder, did they ever really see you? Or were you a flicker between their real beginnings? A name that never made it into their future tense? And yet, here you are, still remembering, still carrying weight they already set down. You weren't just a moment, you were present, you were real. But to them, you were only passing through, and they, already on their way out. I imagined life without you. It sounds almost harmless, like a passing thought. We all wonder, what if I had chosen differently? What if I had walked away sooner? But when it's spoken aloud, when someone tells you they pictured their world without you in it, it doesn't land as curiosity. It lands as erasure. Because this isn't a breakup. It's not a fight. It's not even a goodbye. It's something colder, more surgical. It's a glimpse into a future you weren't invited into. A version of the dream where your part was already written out. You pause, not because they said it with cruelty, but because they said it at all. And now, every shared moment feels a little more hollow, every memory a little less secure. You start to scan backward, wondering when it began, when they started rehearsing the version of their life where you were missing, and what hurts is not just the imagining, it's the calm with which they admit it. As if your absence was a kind of relief, as if the vision without you brought peace, that you, somehow, had become the weight they needed to put down to breathe again. Sometimes, they don't even mean to wound. Sometimes, they say it out of fatigue, or honesty, or a need to explain a growing distance. But the effect is always the same. You feel like a ghost in your own relationship, still present, still breathing, but already half removed from the story they're telling themselves. And it stays with you, not as anger, but as a quiet ache. Because from now on, no matter how close you sit to them, you'll always wonder, are they still imagining life without me? And worse, is that version the one they want more? Picture two people sitting in a familiar place, maybe a park bench, maybe a kitchen table, the kind of place where memories gathered quietly over time. One of them speaks, not with cruelty, but with casual finality. I never took you seriously. At first, it doesn't register. It feels abstract, almost harmless. But then it spreads, like ink dropped into water. It begins to stain everything. Every conversation, every promise, every private moment that once felt sacred now begins to feel performative, one-sided. A script you were earnest in, but they treated like parody. Because to not be taken seriously is more than disrespect. It's a kind of erasure. It says your feelings were noted, but not believed. Your needs were heard, but not held. Your very presence was never something they weighed with real intention. You revisit your past together through a new lens, the way they smiled when you were upset, the way they dodged emotional depth with humor or distraction, the way they seemed amused when you tried to share something honest. You mistook it for lightness. They were never carrying the weight with you, and now you realize, while you were building something, however fragile, they were watching, detached, observing your sincerity like it was a temporary show. Something they could walk out of when the performance became dull. The most painful part is not the truth itself. It's that you meant it all. Every gesture, every word, every apology even. And they didn't. Not really. To be told you were never taken seriously is to find out that your story was never real in their world. It played out only in your memory, earnest, hopeful, raw, while theirs was already skipping ahead, detached, untouched, and already halfway out the door. Some betrayals don't come with betrayal in their voice. They arrive softly, later, as a whisper in the wrong room. I talked about you, not in anger, not always in cruelty, but I did. When your back was turned, when your name was just an empty sound I could shape however I wanted. It felt harmless at first, a story shared too easily, a secret passed like a casual object. I told myself it wasn't gossip, it was concern, or frustration, or honesty. But deep down, I knew. I knew I was turning you into a character, not a person. I stripped you of the right to explain yourself. In old village records from Northern Europe, there were fines, not for theft, but for speech. Speaking someone's name outside their presence was treated like a kind of theft too, the theft of dignity, of trust. Because once a story leaves the mouth of someone who wasn't meant to tell it, it never returns the same. Imagine learning that someone you trusted, someone you sat beside, laughed with, spoke of you like a stranger. Your flaws dissected, your pain reduced, Your complexity flattened into a line they could trade for belonging. I Talked About You isn't just a confession. It's a rewind. It drags everything sacred back through the mud. Every moment of trust, every silence you thought was safe. And once spoken, it can't be softened. Because trust doesn't break like glass. It burns like paper. And the ashes don't speak. Imagine opening up to someone. Slowly, painfully, sharing the part of yourself that still flinches when remembered. You speak in fragments, voice unsteady, offering your past like something fragile. And then, one day, you learn the truth. I mocked your trauma. Maybe not to your face, maybe not in words you ever heard, but it happened. And now, the silence between you feels unbearable. This isn't just cruelty, it's distortion. Your pain was never a joke, but to them, it became one. Something to shrink, to mimic, to laugh at. Not because it wasn't real, but because it made them uncomfortable. Or worse, because it made them feel powerful. Throughout time, people have turned suffering into spectacle. From public punishments in ancient squares to gossip whispered behind closed doors, pain has often been consumed rather than consoled. To mock trauma is to say, your wounds amuse me, that your survival is a story to be twisted for someone else's comfort. And when that mockery comes from someone close, someone who once nodded with empathy, offered you safety, it changes everything. The memory of their support curdles. You replay their reactions, wondering which ones were genuine and which were quietly laced with contempt. Mocking trauma doesn't just injure trust. It strips a person of dignity. It turns the most vulnerable truth into the cheapest currency, a punchline. And some punchlines echo for years. I played both sides. It sounds almost strategic, as if navigating a conflict meant staying balanced, informed, in control. But the moment it's said aloud, the illusion of neutrality crumbles. Because when you play both sides, you aren't choosing peace, you're choosing self-preservation over loyalty. And when the truth comes out, no one feels safe anymore. Imagine two people, each thinking you stood with them. You nodded in the right places. You comforted one while listening to the other. You stayed just distant enough to avoid risk, just close enough to earn trust. And maybe, for a while, it worked. You moved fluidly between them. You were the bridge, the peacemaker. But bridges, too, collapse under the weight of secrets, because eventually, both sides start to ask, who are you really with? And the answer is neither. Because in trying to keep all doors open, you quietly closed your own. The person who plays both sides isn't trusted. They're studied, watched, doubted. And when you admit it, I played both sides, what you're really saying is, I let everyone believe they had me, while I kept a part of myself out of reach. It's not diplomacy. It's betrayal, dressed in detachment. There's no applause for someone who stayed safe while others were bleeding. No comfort in knowing you were informed, if it came at the cost of being real. Because in the end, playing both sides doesn't protect you. It isolates you. You don't walk away with two allies. You walk away alone. You're replaceable to me. There's no way to soften this blow. No version of it that doesn't collapse something inside you. It's not a scream. It doesn't need volume. It arrives with the stillness of finality. Annihilation disguised as candor. Because we all want to believe we're singular in someone's life. Not perfect, not eternal, but irreplaceable. That our laugh is different. Our timing, our presence, our fingerprints on the hours. So, when someone says the opposite, what they're really saying is, you were never essential. It doesn't always come in cruelty. Sometimes it's hidden in a shrug, a quiet comment, a subtle comparison to the next. But the meaning is unmistakable. You're not rooted in their life. You're just a detail, a name they could swap out without changing the structure of their days. You think about the things you gave, the patience, the sacrifice, the private truths you offered only to them. You remember the way you tried to fit their world like a key fits a lock. And now, you realize they kept a drawer full of spares. What hurts most isn't their freedom to move on. It's the disposability, the idea that someone else could occupy your space speak your lines, and the play would continue uninterrupted. This kind of statement doesn't just wound your heart, it wounds your meaning. It strips your place in their life of weight, as if you were never a chapter, just a footnote. And even if you leave, even if you heal, a part of you carries that sentence, wondering quietly, in new spaces, with new people. Am I someone they could live without, or am I just another name on a list of temporary comforts? Imagine someone who believed they were at the center of your world, someone who adjusted their steps to match yours, who replayed your words long after the conversation ended, who edited their choices because you mattered that much. And then, one day, in a moment of painful clarity, you tell them, "I wasn't thinking of you." It doesn't sound cruel, it sounds honest, and that honesty lands harder than any insult. Because while they were orbiting you, shaping themselves around your gravity, you were somewhere else entirely, unaware, unmoved, making decisions that, to them, felt personal, intimate, but for you, were just decisions. This truth doesn't tear them apart loudly. It dislodges them, gently, irreversibly. It removes the center they thought they were and replaces it with empty space. Suddenly, all their sacrifices, all the patience, all the silent hopes, they feel one-sided, misplaced. They start to question the timeline. Was it ever mutual? Did they matter? Or were they just background noise to a story unfolding without them? And it's not that you didn't care. Maybe you did, in your own way. But when it mattered most, when choices were made, when actions carried weight, you weren't thinking of them. And that absence echoes, not in what was done, but in what was excluded. Because love, even when quiet, notices. It considers. And when someone realizes they were never a factor in your inner world, not even a passing thought, what's lost isn't just the bond. It's the dignity of having mattered. You were their sun. And with one line, you became a distant star, still burning perhaps, but no longer warming anything that needed your light. Some things break with time. Others were never whole to begin with. I didn't mean the promise, not just that I failed to keep it, but that I never intended to. I said the words because they were needed, because they soothed, because they gave you something to hold on to, while I was already letting go. We like to believe promises are sacred, that when someone says, "I'll always be there," or "I won't leave," they've carved it into stone. But sometimes, those words are written in fog, meant only to last the moment. And still, you believed them. You built something on them. You made plans, softened, stayed. In the letters of soldiers who never returned home, promises linger. "I'll be back by spring. We'll build that house." But some knew, before the ink dried, that they wouldn't. They made the promise not to honor it, but to protect the heart they were about to leave behind. Imagine hearing the truth, years later, that the words you replayed, clung to, forgave with, were never sincere. The ring, the vow, the late-night assurances, all said to calm a storm, not to withstand it. The betrayal isn't just in the breaking, it's in the fact that there was never anything solid to break. I didn't mean the promise doesn't just hurt, it dismantles, because it doesn't rewrite the ending, it rewrites the beginning. It says, what you thought was real never was, and there's no coming back from that kind of silence. Imagine discovering that your entire connection with someone, every message, every compliment, every carefully constructed moment, wasn't real. It was a dare, a challenge, a bet. Not affection, not curiosity, just a game. You were a bet. It's a truth that doesn't just sting, it erases. It reduces your worth to a joke shared behind closed doors. Suddenly, your name was never whispered in intimacy. It was laughed over, measured in points, exchanged like currency among spectators. To be a bet is to be converted from human to object. Your feelings become a variable, your trust, a scoreboard. And the worst part? You never even knew you were playing. You were sincere, vulnerable, honest. They were performing. History remembers these cruelties in small margins, the letters exchanged as pranks, the secret contests among peers to see who could win someone's heart fastest. But those footnotes never capture the aftermath, the long silence that follows, the self-questioning, the shame that isn't yours but still clings. When the truth finally arrives, it retroactively poisons everything. The laughter you shared, staged. The connection you felt, fabricated. The warmth you believed in, manufactured for someone else's amusement. You were a bet. Isn't just betrayal. It's humiliation. It tells you that your dignity was negotiable, that your heart was used for entertainment. And once you know, you can never unknow it. Because even after the game ends, the damage plays on. I didn't want that memory. Not because it was painful, not because it brought regret, but because it simply didn't mean to you what it meant to them. And in saying so, you do more than reject a moment. You unravel someone's joy. You turn their treasure into fiction. We like to believe that memories are shared, that when we look back, the warmth we felt is mirrored in the eyes of the person beside us. But memory doesn't work that way. It's asymmetrical. One person laughs, the other tolerates. One feels intimacy, the other endures. And yet, both carry the moment until one decides to drop it. Imagine someone telling you about the night they knew they loved you, the song that played, the way you looked at them, the quiet awe in their voice. And then imagine replying, not cruelly, just honestly, I didn't want that memory. You were tired, you felt distant, you were already drifting, and just like that, their certainty dissolves. Because to dismiss a memory is to rewrite it, not only for yourself, but for the one who held it sacred. The smile they thought they saw now feels imagined. The closeness they believed in, a trick of the light. You haven't just rejected the past, you've reclassified it, from shared to mistaken, from cherished to one-sided. And the wound it leaves isn't loud, it lingers in quiet questions. Was I ever seen? Did I invent the closeness? Because what they kept alive in nostalgia, you quietly buried in truth. Some memories don't fade, they are taken. And sometimes, all it takes to undo them is a sentence said too plainly, too late. I didn't need you. At first, it sounds like independence, like strength, maybe even clarity. But beneath its surface is something colder, a quiet erasure. Because what this sentence really does is dissolve everything shared into coincidence. It reduces intimacy to convenience, interdependence into an accidental intersection. You start to replay every moment. The nights you stayed up listening, the days you rearranged your schedule, your feelings, your future, to make space for them. The way you showed up, not because they begged, but because you felt needed. And now you're told that wasn't true. That your presence, your effort, your care, they were optional. Not pillars, just decoration. It rewrites the story. Not all at once, but piece by piece. Suddenly, the memory of your sacrifices loses its color. Your apologies seem unnecessary. Your support feels like it landed in a space that never required it. You weren't a partner. You were a visitor. This sentence doesn't scream. It doesn't accuse. It doesn't even end things. It simply disconnects you from the narrative, as if your role was never truly vital, as if their life would have played out the same, with or without you. And what lingers is not just hurt, but a kind of floating, an emotional displacement. If you were never needed, then were you ever really wanted? Or were you simply nearby at the right time, close enough to comfort, but never close enough to matter? I didn't need you doesn't deny the past. It just renders it irrelevant. And for the one who stayed, who tried, who gave, it leaves a silence that feels deeper than absence. It feels like being unwritten. Imagine standing before someone you trusted, someone whose choices left you bruised in places no one else could see. And after all the silence, the confusion, the quiet pleading for explanation, they finally say it, plainly, almost calmly. I knew it'd hurt. Not, I didn't mean to. Not, I wasn't thinking, but I knew. And suddenly, everything changes, because pain caused by accident feels different than pain inflicted with awareness. There's room for forgiveness in clumsiness, in the chaos of emotional misfires. But when they admit they saw it coming, understood what it would do to you, and still went through with it, that's not a mistake. That's a choice. You begin to replay the moment, the words they said, the silence that followed, the way they avoided your eyes, not out of confusion, but out of guilt they had already accepted. They braced for the fallout while you were still holding on, hoping the hurt was unintentional. And that's what cuts deepest. Not just that they hurt you, but that they chose to. That your pain was weighed, measured, and deemed acceptable. A cost they were willing to pay. But it wasn't their cost. It was yours. And now, when they say it, I knew it'd hurt, they offer it like a confession. But it lands like a withdrawal of care, of tenderness, of the illusion that you were ever truly safe with them. There's no comfort in knowing they understood. It doesn't restore anything. It just confirms the worst, that your heart broke in slow motion while they watched and kept going anyway. Some arguments end with silence. Others end with victory that feels like a wound. I only said it to win, not because it was true, not because I believed it, but because I knew it would land like a blade. I wanted the upper hand more than I wanted your trust. It wasn't the worst thing I could have said, just the most precise. The sentence sharpened by old memories, past mistakes, your softest insecurities. I reached for it like a weapon I'd been hiding, and I used it, not to communicate, but to conquer. In courtroom transcripts from centuries ago, there are records of lies told not to protect, but to destroy. Accusations crafted for the sole purpose of tipping the scales. And when the trial ended, the truth was no longer the point. Only the win mattered. The damage was just collateral. Imagine revisiting the conversation. You remember what I said, word for word. Maybe you held on to it, unpacked it, bled from it. But here's the truth. I never told you. I didn't mean it. I just needed you to lose. I only said it to win doesn't clean the wound, it infects it. Because now, even the apology becomes another move, another strategy. You can't trust the regret, because the lie wore the costume of truth once, and it fit too well. What's left isn't clarity. It's a battlefield with no flag and no one left standing. Imagine confronting someone about the pain they caused you, hoping for reflection, maybe even regret. But instead, they look at you without hesitation and say, I would do it again. No apology, no second thoughts, just certainty wrapped in defiance. That sentence doesn't just reopen the wound, it confirms it was intentional. It means the hurt wasn't an accident. It wasn't a mistake made in the fog of confusion. It was a choice, and worse, it still would be. There's a finality in those words, because even the cruelest actions can sometimes be softened by remorse. We believe in change, in learning, in the human capacity to evolve, but when someone says they'd repeat the harm, they erase the possibility of growth. They make the pain permanent, not just in memory but in meaning. History has seen this mindset before, in power, in war, in betrayal that repeats itself through generations. Not because people didn't know better, but because they didn't care to do better. Harm becomes habit, and habit becomes identity. To hear I would do it again is to realize the past isn't behind you. It's waiting ahead, unchanged. It tells you that what you survived once was never seen as wrong, that your suffering didn't register as consequence. Some people don't just walk away from damage, they plant roots in it. And the only way to survive is to stop asking them why. I didn't care at all. There's no anger in it, no apology, just a flat line of feeling, a calm admission that lands heavier than rage. Because some words burn, but this one doesn't. It chills. It empties. It turns all the moments you thought mattered into a mirage. Imagine replaying a memory, a fight, a confession, a moment of vulnerability you thought was pivotal. You remember how your hands trembled, how your voice cracked, how much it cost you to say the thing out loud. And now, years later, they say it plainly. I didn't care at all. It rewrites everything, not with pain, but with indifference. The emotional desert opens wide, and you realize you were the only one standing there. carrying the heat, the tension, the meaning. They were never beside you. They were somewhere else entirely. Indifference is not the absence of emotion, it's the refusal to carry any of it. While you wept or hoped or feared, they were still, unmoved, watching you struggle under the weight of something they never picked up. This kind of truth doesn't stab, it unravels. Because now the past feels hollow. The glances, the gestures, the shared silences, you thought they were coated with depth, but now you wonder, were they just nothing? And even if you try to salvage the memory, part of you can't unhear it. I didn't care at all. It sits at the center of everything now, quiet, heavy, final. I wanted them more. It doesn't sound angry. It doesn't even sound regretful. But that's what makes it ache so deeply. Because this isn't just about love lost. It's about desire measured, craved, compared. And in that equation, you didn't come first. There's a difference between someone leaving and someone choosing someone else. The first feels like a drift. The second feels like judgment. It ranks you, quietly, cruelly, beneath someone you may never know. And it leaves behind a silence full of questions that can't be answered. Was it their laugh? Their timing? Something about the way they entered the room? Or was it simpler than that? Just want, raw and unfiltered. The kind of longing you can't manufacture or compete with. A desire that made every moment with you feel like waiting. The sentence doesn't erase the love you had. It doesn't say you weren't good. It just says you weren't wanted enough. Not in the way that counts when decisions are made. And so the memories shift. The nights you stayed close, the efforts, the closeness. They don't vanish, but they start to dim. Because now you know their heart was leaning elsewhere even then. To be loved is one thing. To be wanted more than someone else, that's another. It's not just intimacy, it's selection. When someone says I wanted them more, they aren't just leaving, they're ranking. They're choosing a flame you didn't ignite. And what stays with you isn't only the pain, it's the comparison, the invisible ruler they held you against without you ever knowing. And once measured, it's hard not to measure yourself again and again. Even in places where no one is asking you to. Imagine spending months, maybe years, piecing together a story you told yourself about how things ended, not out of denial, but out of survival. You filled the gaps with meaning. You softened the edges. You made peace with the silences because you thought you knew what they meant. And then one day, you hear it. Not with malice, not even with regret, just a simple admission. I rewrote the ending. At first, it's confusing. Endings are supposed to be shared, closure, mutual. But what they're telling you is this. While you were grieving, healing, assigning shape to the final chapter, they were altering it, silently, without you. Maybe they told others a different version, one where they were kinder, or blameless, or braver than they were. Maybe they recast you as unstable, or forgettable, or too much. And while you were still carrying their memory with care, they were reshaping it to fit a story that served them better. This isn't just about the facts, it's about betrayal of authorship, of believing you were co-writing something meaningful, only to discover you were edited out in the final draft. Your heartbreak reduced to a subplot. Your love turned into a lesson. Your presence, a phase they now describe with casual detachment. And the worst part? You can't undo it. Their version now lives somewhere, passed on, believed. It stains the past you once held sacred. And suddenly, your closure, once delicate but whole, shatters into something unrecognizable. Because the story wasn't just what happened, it was the meaning you gave it. And now, even that feels stolen. Some betrayals are subtle, others leave no doubt. I let you drown. Not metaphorically, not figuratively. I saw you struggling, choking on silence, reaching for something solid, and I did nothing. I watched. Maybe I even turned away. You were never asking for much, just a response, a presence, a hand. But I told myself you'd figure it out, that you were strong, that you didn't need saving. The truth, I didn't want to carry your weight. I didn't want to step into your storm. So I stayed dry while you sank. In the journals of polar expeditions, there are quiet confessions. One explorer wrote of a man falling through the ice, calling for help. But they were low on supplies, tired, afraid, so they stood still. And later, when they spoke of it, they said only, "We waited too long." Imagine being the one who trusted me, who cracked open in front of me, who said, in so many ways, "Please don't leave me in this." And I did, not with cruelty, but with absence, with distraction, with 1,000 justifications that now sound like betrayal. I let you drown is not a mistake. It's a decision. Maybe not all at once, maybe not out of malice, but it happened. And now, the memory surfaces when it's quiet. When I remember the messages I didn't answer, the calls I silenced, the moment you stopped asking. And by the time I looked back, there was only still water. Imagine realizing that every time you opened up, every confession, every vulnerability, every quiet reveal was being cataloged. Not to understand you, not to care, but to control. I studied you to manipulate. It doesn't just end trust. It rewrites the entire relationship as strategy. They watched how you reacted to silence, which compliments softened you, which fears made you retreat. They memorized your habits like a map, tracing the routes to your insecurities, marking the shortcuts to your trust. And all of it wasn't to know you better. It was to use you more efficiently. This isn't love. It isn't even cruelty in the usual sense. It's calculation. A cold, deliberate extraction of your emotional blueprint, carried out with the precision of someone who sees connection not as something sacred, but as something exploitable. Throughout history, manipulation has worn many faces: political charmers, deceptive allies, false prophets. But the most dangerous are personal. The ones who sit across from you at dinner, smile at your stories, hold your hand when you're breaking, while quietly taking notes. To be studied this way is to feel less like a person, more like a puzzle someone enjoyed solving, not to admire, but to dismantle. And once the game is exposed, every memory becomes contaminated. Every moment you thought was shared, every warmth you thought was mutual, was actually a move, a plan. And you were just the outcome. I made you doubt yourself. It sounds almost clinical, like a diagnosis. But what it truly is destruction. The kind that doesn't break bones. It breaks mirrors. It makes you question not just what happened, but whether you can trust your own mind to remember it. Gaslighting is a quiet fire. It doesn't rage. It simmers. A misplaced detail here. A contradiction there. A tone that says you're overreacting, even when you aren't. Over time, it rewrites your sense of self, until your instincts feel foreign and your truth feels like a guess. Imagine confronting someone with a hurt. You say, "This happened." They say, "That's not how I remember it." Or worse, you're imagining things. You begin to retreat, not because you believe them entirely, but because you start to not believe yourself. That erosion happens slowly, thought by thought, until you apologize for things you never did, feel guilty for feelings you were right to have, and mistrust the very voice inside your head. And then one day, they say it. I made you doubt yourself. It's not a healing moment. It's not even an apology. It's confirmation that what you feared was real, that the fog wasn't yours alone, that someone lit it on purpose. It's a kind of psychological arson, burning down your confidence not to watch it fall, but to rebuild it in their image. And even if they admit it now, the damage lingers. Because once doubt takes root in your mind, it keeps echoing in your quietest moments. And sometimes, the hardest part is this: even knowing the truth doesn't make you feel whole again. I laughed behind your back. It's not just a betrayal, it's a retroactive haunting. Because once those words are said, every smile, every nod, every warm moment becomes suspect. 1,000 memories now look like masks. And you begin to wonder, how long was I performing for someone who was already turning me into a joke? Laughter, when shared, is intimacy. But when it's done in secret, about you, not with you, it becomes something sharper, something that carves at your sense of safety. because it means your vulnerability wasn't protected. It was parodied. Held up not with care, but with mockery. You start to replay moments that once felt light. The way they laughed a little too hard. The glances exchanged when you spoke. The quiet pauses that didn't feel like silence until now. And suddenly, you're not remembering. You're investigating. Trying to spot the moment when affection turned into amusement. The cruelty isn't always obvious. Sometimes the laughter is soft. A private comment. A knowing smirk shared with someone else. But what it breaks is not your pride, it's your trust. You offered pieces of yourself, quirks, insecurities, rawness, and they became material, not held, not honored, just entertaining. And now, the next time someone says you're funny, you hesitate, not because you don't believe them, but because part of you wonders if you're being laughed with or at. That's what this kind of betrayal does. It rewires your sense of closeness. It teaches you to second-guess the very thing you once called connection. Some wounds don't bleed, they echo. And I laughed behind your back is one of them. It's the kind of sentence that doesn't shout, but you still hear it every time someone smiles too soon. Imagine believing someone loves you enough to let you breathe, to trust your distance, to honor your rhythms, to let you disappear into yourself now and then without suspicion. And then one day, perhaps quietly, perhaps in apology, they admit, I tracked you out of fear. Not curiosity, not concern. Fear, not of losing you, but of not being in control of how you move through the world. What you thought was space turns out to have been monitored. That moment you lingered too long at a cafe, that night your phone died, that time you needed stillness alone, it was never fully yours. They weren't asking where you were, they were checking. Watching, recording, silently filling in blanks that love, in its healthier form, should have left open. They'll say it wasn't about control. They'll say it was about anxiety, or trauma, or care that got too loud. And maybe, in their mind, that's true. But love, when twisted by fear, stops being love. It becomes vigilance. The soft surveillance of someone who cannot let go, not even for a moment. And the worst part, you didn't notice. Not at first. You thought the tension was your own. You thought the guilt for being late, or quiet, or tired was self-made. But it wasn't. It was shaped by invisible eyes that never blinked. To be tracked without knowing is to be held without being trusted. And when they confess it, I tracked you out of fear, they want you to see it as vulnerability. But it feels like violation. Because now you must question. Were you ever truly free in their presence, or were you just tolerated until your distance triggered their panic? Love cannot grow where freedom is watched. It shrinks, it adapts, it hides, and eventually it withers into something that looks like closeness but is really just captivity dressed in care. I enjoyed being needed, not loved, not seen, needed. There's a difference. Love invites, need demands. And for a while, I craved that demand more than anything. Your helplessness made me feel essential, like the glue in your breaking, the answer to your collapse. You'd call me crying, lost, unraveling, and I'd arrive, not just because I cared, but because it fed something in me. Being the one you turned to made me feel powerful, worthy. As if your weakness was proof of my value. Historical letters from wartime caretakers speak of a strange emptiness after the wounded were healed. They missed being needed, even if it meant living among pain. Because when someone depends on you completely, it gives you a kind of identity. It disguises control as kindness. Imagine the truth behind my comfort. That part of me didn't want you to get better, not fully. Because what would that make me? Who would I be if you no longer needed my hand, my voice, my reassurance? Healing you meant losing the role I played in your life. I enjoyed being needed is not a confession of compassion. It's one of dependence. Because it wasn't just you who was clinging. It was me, too. Not to you, but to the version of myself who mattered only when you were falling apart. And now, when you're steady, distant, whole, I feel invisible. Because in the absence of your need, I don't know how to belong. Imagine someone cheering you on, nodding through your victories, offering polite applause when you succeed. And then, much later, you hear the truth. I waited for you to fail. Not only did they not believe in you, they were silently rooting for your collapse. That sentence doesn't just change how you see them, it changes how you see yourself. Because now, every stumble feels like a moment they savored. Every hard day, a quiet celebration for someone who masked resentment with encouragement. To wait for someone to fail is not passive. It's a betrayal that requires patience. They didn't push you, they just stood back, hoping gravity would do the rest. And when it didn't, when you kept rising, they smiled thinner, quieter, colder. This mindset isn't new. In every era, there have been those who couldn't stand the success of others, not because it harmed them, but because it reminded them of their own stagnation. They disguised envy as concern. They asked polite questions, all while hoping the answer was bad news. And the worst part, you trusted them. You shared your fears, your pressure points, your dreams. They knew exactly where you might crack, and they were watching, waiting, wishing, not for your growth, but your undoing. I waited for you to fail isn't just a confession. It's a revelation that support was never real. It was surveillance dressed as friendship, and nothing ever sounds the same after that. I told them everything. The words don't arrive like a storm. They come softly, without guilt, without fury. But they carry the same impact as any betrayal. Because betrayal doesn't always require knives, just lips, just the decision to unwrap something sacred and pass it along like idle gossip. You trusted them, not just with secrets, but with pieces of yourself you didn't offer to anyone else. The broken parts, the raw thoughts, the stories still forming inside you. You assumed those words landed somewhere safe, tucked behind quiet loyalty, but instead, they were repeated, shared, examined, perhaps even laughed at. Imagine speaking in the dark, believing the darkness meant safety, and then one day, the lights come on, and your words are there, on someone else's tongue. Details only one person knew, phrases that belonged to your private sorrow, now foreign in another's mouth. The betrayal isn't only that they shared, it's that they decided your intimacy was theirs to use, to fill silence, to feel important, to be closer to someone else at your expense. And when they say, I told them everything, it's not just your secrets they've exposed, it's your trust, your willingness to ever open up again. Now, you carry a kind of quiet restraint. You speak, but more carefully. You share, but not fully. Because once a sacred thing has been made common, it can never be untouched. And the person who told, whether they regret it or not, now lives on the other side of a line they chose to cross. I didn't think you'd survive. At first, it sounds like surprise, maybe even admiration. But beneath the surface, it's something colder, something darker. Because to admit you didn't expect someone to make it is to confess that, on some level, you imagined their collapse, maybe even counted on it. It's not always said with malice. Sometimes it slips out during a conversation, as if it were just an honest thought. But that's what makes it worse. The honesty, the casualness, the quiet revelation that while you were holding on by your fingernails, they were quietly bracing for your fall. It reframes everything. Every silence they offered, every polite nod, every absence when you needed someone present. You begin to realize they weren't just distant, they were resigned. They had already rehearsed your failure in their mind, already made peace with your absence, perhaps even seen it as inevitable. And when someone admits this, they don't just reveal their doubt, they expose their indifference. Because to believe someone won't survive is not just to fear for them. It is to emotionally step back, to prepare for a version of life that no longer includes them. You remember the pain you carried, the nights you barely held on, the moments you chose to keep going when it would have been easier not to. And now you learn that someone close to you wasn't hoping. They were watching, silently, maybe even subconsciously, waiting for you to disappear. And you didn't. You're still here. But now, you carry a new weight. Not just the memory of survival, but the quiet echo of someone who didn't believe in it. someone who expected your vanishing. And in their eyes, you weren't strong, you were lucky. Imagine standing next to someone, thinking you're walking side by side. You believe the path is shared, that choices will be made with you in mind. But one day, without anger or apology, they tell you the truth. I picked them before you, not because they had to, but because they wanted to. They weighed your presence against another's, and in that silent comparison, you came second. It wasn't about mistakes, it wasn't about timing, it was a decision. And that's what lingers. Not the loss, but the clarity. You weren't overlooked, you were evaluated, you were considered. And then, somewhere in their private calculation, you were quietly set aside. You begin to rewind, to retrace moments that once felt mutual. Their laughter, their patience, the things they said when you were most open. Were those real, or were they practiced, until the person they truly wanted came along? And yet, what stings more than rejection is hierarchy. Love doesn't thrive in ranks. Hearts aren't meant to be sorted like options. But when they chose someone else first, they turned connection into competition. And your worth, for a moment, was measured against someone else's ability to captivate them more. Even if they came back to you, even if they stayed in the end, you now carry that sentence like a stone in your pocket. They picked someone else first, and everything that followed now feels like a second draft, edited, revised, settled for. Because when someone ranks your heart behind another's, it doesn't just hurt in the present, it reshapes the past. It tells you, even when you felt closest, they were already drifting away towards someone who wasn't you. Some betrayals are loud, others arrive as whispers. I shared your secret, not to wound, not to ruin, just once, just with someone I trusted, just a moment of weakness dressed up as conversation. But one leak destroys the dam, and trust, once spilled, doesn't gather back the same. You told me because you thought I was safe. You paused before speaking, searched my eyes for safety, and then gave me something fragile, something heavy. I nodded, promised. And then, later, when the silence stretched too far, I broke it, casually, as if it were mine to tell. In old village courts, there were no harsher penalties than for oath-breaking. Secrets were currency. To trade one was to lose your place in the circle. Exile didn't always come with walls. It came with eyes that no longer looked at you the same way. Imagine what you must have felt when you found out. That moment when the world tilted, when your most guarded truth lived suddenly in other mouths, other versions, and you realized it wasn't stolen, it was handed away. By me. I shared your secret isn't just an admission of error, it's an unraveling of everything that came before. Every laugh, every late-night confession, every, "you can trust me." Because the words I spoke after that don't matter. The damage had already echoed, and what we had, whatever it was, couldn't hold water anymore. Imagine looking into the eyes of someone you trusted, someone who stood beside you, cheered for you, laughed with you, and hearing them say, "I wanted your role," not admiration, not inspiration, but desire, edged with envy, a quiet wish that your life had been theirs. This confession doesn't start with a betrayal. It begins with closeness, with someone who walked alongside you, learning your routines, understanding your strengths, studying how the world responded to you, and all the while, they weren't just observing, they were comparing, measuring, wanting. I wanted your role turns every shared moment into silent competition. Every compliment becomes loaded, every kind gesture a possible performance, because now you see it for what it was, proximity used for positioning. This kind of jealousy isn't loud, it doesn't attack, it attaches, it blends in, it mirrors your confidence, echoes your voice, walks your path one step behind, waiting for a chance to step ahead. History is littered with stories of closeness turned conquest. Friendships frayed not by argument, but by ambition unspoken. Roles envied, lives imitated, loyalties tested by the quiet hunger to trade places. And once the truth is spoken, something shifts permanently. Because you can forgive distance, even conflict. But it's hard to forget that someone didn't want to walk with you. They wanted to walk as you. Jealousy confessed doesn't always lead to healing. Sometimes it just names the distance that was already growing. I didn't mean goodbye. It sounds like regret, but it's more than that. It's a confession of unfinished closure, a door half shut, a sentence never completed. And when closure doesn't come cleanly, the wound it leaves doesn't heal. It reopens quietly, in the moments you least expect, bleeding into the present like a memory that forgot how to stay in the past. Sometimes goodbyes aren't spoken at all. They happen in pauses that never end, in messages never returned, in a final meeting that felt like just another Tuesday. You assume there's more to come, one more talk, one more reason, one more chance to say what needed saying. But it never arrives. And then, much later, they say it. I didn't mean goodbye, not in apology, not in longing, just as a fact. That when they walked away, they didn't know it would be the last time. That when they closed the door, they thought they'd open it again. But life moved on. And so did they. But you didn't. You stayed in that moment, replaying it, rewriting it, waiting for the chapter to resolve. Because what they left behind wasn't just silence, it was uncertainty. And uncertainty is louder than absence. It keeps whispering possibilities into rooms that should be quiet. So when they finally say it, when they admit I didn't mean goodbye, it doesn't soothe. It stings. Because you realize the pain wasn't from the leaving, it was from not knowing it was the end. Some closures come with clarity. Others echo forever. I measured your love. It's a quiet confession, almost clinical in its delivery. But behind it is something deeply unsettling. Because once love is measured, it stops being love. It becomes a currency, a transaction, something to be tallied, compared, judged. You might not even notice it at first. The way someone begins to count, not out loud, but inwardly. How much did you give? How quickly did you forgive? How often did you bend, compromise, stay silent to keep the peace? All those gestures that felt like love to you, to them, they became data, proof to be collected, or ammunition to be used later. And when they say it, I measured your love, what they're admitting is that it was never just about connection. It was about leverage, equity, a private scoreboard they kept hidden until the moment it served them to show it. You replay conversations, the ones where you gave more than you got, the times they asked if you'd still stay, even when things were unfair. You told yourself it was love. They told themselves it was control. Because when affection is weighed, it becomes conditional. And you become a scale, not a person. What hurts is not just the calculation. It's the realization that your emotions were being assessed in real time. That instead of being received, your love was being audited. Even if they say it without cruelty, even if they call it honesty, the damage is done. Because now you know, your love wasn't just felt, it was evaluated. And in the quiet spaces where trust once lived, you'll start to wonder, was it ever mutual? Or was it always a quiet ledger, ticking beneath every touch? Imagine someone confiding in you, their voice small, eyes searching for understanding. They describe a wound, not one you can see, but one that shapes how they move through the world. And you, perhaps meaning to soothe, perhaps wanting to hurry past a discomfort, say something soft but sharp. It's not that bad. Or maybe, you'll get over it. At the time it seems harmless, reassuring even. But later, sometimes much later, you realize what you did. I downplayed your pain. Minimization rarely shouts. It whispers. It tucks someone's suffering into a drawer and assures them it isn't worth opening. It's a quiet denial, wrapped in the language of comfort. The intention is to help, to heal, to lighten the weight. But the effect is isolation. Their experience shrinks. Their voice falters. Their reality is rewritten as smaller than it truly was. They begin to question themselves. Was it really that serious? Should I have felt less? Should I even speak up next time? What was once raw and honest now feels like an overreaction. And in that shrinking, a bond is weakened. Trust doesn't dissolve in a single moment, but in a series of small dismissals, each one smoothing the edges until pain can no longer find a voice. Sometimes, the minimizer looks back and sees it all with clarity. The tears that never quite reached the surface, the apologies that came too quickly, the way their urge to comfort actually became a form of erasure. To downplay someone's pain is not just to misunderstand it, but to make them carry it alone. What they needed was space to be seen. What they got was permission to disappear. And in that silence, something essential is lost, not just between two people, but within the one who learns their hurt is not allowed to matter. I told them you lied. The words themselves are quiet, but their aftermath isn't. Confessing it now doesn't fix what's already been set in motion, because to tell someone else you lied is more than just a statement. It's a ripple through another person's reality. It changes not just how others see you, but how you see yourself. It starts with a moment, maybe a disagreement, maybe a small detail twisted out of frustration or fear. Rather than speaking to you, I spoke about you. I carried your story to other ears but stripped of your intent, your reasons, your voice. I told them you lied, and in doing so, I altered the entire shape of your truth. Suddenly, what you said was suspect. Your memories, questionable. Your presence, shadowed by doubt you didn't create. Imagine walking into a room and feeling eyes linger a moment too long. Laughter that pauses when you enter. Friends who become cautious. Conversations that once flowed now stuttering around invisible barriers. All because a seed of suspicion was planted where trust had once grown. And you, unknowing, move through a world that's shifted beneath you, never quite sure why things feel colder. When I finally confess, I told them you lied, the damage is already woven into the fabric of your life. Apologies come too late. The harm isn't in the words themselves, but in the distance they've sown, a distance you can't bridge with explanation alone. And perhaps the hardest part is realizing how easily a truth, once rewritten, becomes its own reality. I was always pretending, not just once, not only in front of strangers, but everywhere. The smile carefully arranged, the laughter offered at the right moments, the mask so practiced that after a while it became more familiar than your own skin. You tell yourself it's a shield, a way to keep the world at a safe distance, but over time, the mask becomes the only real thing. Imagine looking in the mirror and seeing not yourself, but a performance. Every gesture measured, every word chosen for effect, not for truth. You begin to lose track of where the acting ends and the genuine begins. Did you really enjoy that conversation, or were you rehearsing lines you learned to keep others comfortable? Was your affection real, or simply the next scene in a script you never wrote? Pretending isn't always about deception. Sometimes it's survival. Sometimes it's easier to play the role expected of you than risk showing what you truly are. The fear isn't just of being rejected, but of realizing there's nothing behind the mask. Only more masks, layered through the years. The hardest confessions come in quiet moments, when the audience is gone. I was always pretending. It's an admission that doesn't bring freedom right away. Instead, it leaves you sitting in the ruins of roles you can no longer sustain. And you wonder, if you take off the mask, what's left? Is there a face beneath, or only the hollow where authenticity used to live? The longer you pretend, the more the mask attaches itself. Eventually, it's not just protection, it's identity. And the real you becomes harder to find, even when you're searching in silence. I let them hurt you, not because I joined them, not because I wished you pain, but because I stood by. And silence, I've learned, is not neutral. It is a kind of betrayal. In the moment when you needed a voice, when the room grew heavy with accusation or cruelty, I stayed silent. Maybe I told myself it wasn't my fight, or that you were strong enough to endure. But the truth is, I chose the easier path. I chose the absence when presence was required. There is a peculiar pain in realizing that help was possible, but withheld. That the person beside you watched it unfold and, for whatever reason, decided not to intervene. You replay those moments, searching their face, their posture, their eyes, for any sign they understood, wondering if they felt the sting that you did, or if their silence was comfortable, a blanket pulled tighter around themselves. Imagine being hurt and looking up, hoping to find an ally, and instead meeting averted eyes. The memory lingers, not only of the pain inflicted, but of the protection denied. The sense of abandonment seeps deeper than the original wound because it carries a lesson that sometimes the people closest to you will choose not to stand between you and harm. And later, when the words come, "I let them hurt you," they aren't an apology. They are an admission, a naming of complicity. And the echo of that silence, once exposed, feels louder than any scream. Because betrayal doesn't always need action. Sometimes, it's the spaces where action never happened at all. I said it for power. These words don't come wrapped in apology. They land quietly, but with a force that ripples beneath the surface. Because speech, when wielded as a weapon, cannot be unheard. It is etched into the air, into memory, into the spaces between people. Imagine a moment when words were chosen not to heal, but to control, to dominate, to assert a presence by diminishing another. Sometimes the words are sharp knives, sometimes they are slow poison. But always, they carry an intent beyond expression. They are tools of power. When someone says, "I said it for power," they admit that their speech wasn't innocent, that behind the sentence lies a calculation, a desire not to connect, but to conquer, to shape the narrative, to tilt the scales in their favor, to leave the other person smaller, quieter, less certain. And for the one who hears these words, the impact is profound. Because speech isn't just sound, it's identity. It's how we claim ourselves, how we invite others in or push them away. When words become weapons, they fracture trust. They carve lines where none existed, walls where once there were bridges. You may replay the moment, the tone, the timing. Wonder if it could have been different. But the truth is, speech given for power changes the landscape forever. It doesn't just wound, it redefines the relationship, shifting the balance until it's almost unrecognizable. And even if the words fade, their shadow lingers. A reminder that sometimes the strongest violence is silent, that sometimes the loudest battles are fought not with fists, but with the quiet precision of chosen phrases. Imagine stepping onto a small, expectant stage, not in a theater, but in everyday life. You adjust yourself, just a little, to be seen. You measure your words, smooth your edges, sense the invisible audience waiting. And somewhere in that pause, the truth flickers. I wanted the applause, not the connection, not the truth, just the recognition, the soft rush of approval that feels, for a moment, like warmth. You learn early how good it feels. The smiles, the claps, the subtle lift when others notice. The echo lingers long after the moment passes, making you chase it again and again. But applause is fleeting. It arrives like a wave, then leaves you emptier than before. To win it, you polish yourself into what others expect, not who you are. You say what will be admired, not what needs to be spoken. Slowly, authenticity fades. Not with drama, but with 1,000 small trades. The world rewards what glitters. It teaches you to curate your pain, your joy, even your silence. Realness becomes a risk. Vulnerability, a liability. So you hide the trembling parts and rehearse the lines that earn another round of praise. Over time, the applause you sought becomes a wall. It separates you from the people who might have loved your roughness, your doubts, your messy, complicated truth. The approval you craved becomes the emptiness you inhabit. And when the stage goes dark, when the crowd is gone, when the echo fades, you're left with only yourself. Unapplauded, unperformed. And in that silence you wonder, what might have grown if you'd let yourself be seen, instead of only being admired? Because applause fills a moment, but only authenticity fills a life. I hoped you'd break. It isn't something people admit easily. Sometimes it's never said at all, but the feeling, quiet, poisonous, can live beneath the surface, unspoken. It isn't rage or shouting. It's a silent wish, a hope buried so deep you almost convince yourself it's not there. Yet, at moments of jealousy, resentment, or pain, the wish flickers, that something in the other person might finally collapse. Destruction whispered, not shouted. You watch them struggle, and a part of you doesn't intervene, not out of helplessness, but from a secret longing to see them falter. Maybe it's envy, the way they seem to move through life with ease while you stumble. Maybe it's hurt, wounds you never voiced, losses you never named. Or maybe it's just the fatigue of carrying your own brokenness alone. Imagine seeing someone you know, someone you once rooted for, holding themselves together through challenge after challenge. And instead of offering your hand, you withdraw. You wait for the slip, for the unraveling. Sometimes you justify it. They need to know how it feels. Sometimes you don't justify it at all. It's a kind of betrayal that doesn't leave evidence. No harsh words, no dramatic scene, only an absence of support, a withheld kindness. The silent hope that if they break, maybe your own pain will make more sense, or maybe you'll finally see them as human, no longer untouched by the struggles that haunt you. But the secret wish never brings peace. It lingers, heavy and unresolved, because hoping for someone's collapse is a wound you inflict on both of you. It corrodes trust, and even if the breaking never happens, the knowledge that you wished for it remains. I could erase you easily. The words don't shout. They don't demand attention. Instead, they settle quietly, like a shadow stretching across familiar ground. But their meaning is sharp, deliberate, a quiet threat that cuts deeper than anger or regret. This sentence doesn't invite dialogue. It doesn't open a door for understanding. It closes one. It ends not just conversations, but people, erasing their presence, their value, their place in memory. Imagine someone saying this, not in fury, but with cold certainty. The kind that says you were never truly essential, never truly permanent, that you could be wiped away without effort, without remorse, like chalk on a blackboard, or footprints in the sand, here one moment, gone the next. And for the one who hears it, the impact is profound, because it isn't just about being forgotten. It's about being deemed disposable, as if your existence was a choice easily reversed. It fractures identity, the belief that you matter, that you leave a mark. This sentence holds power in its silence. It says, I hold the pen, and I can rewrite the story without you. It transforms presence into absence, warmth into cold distance. It redefines the narrative, not with words, but with omission. And once spoken, it echoes quietly, in the spaces between interactions, in the pauses where affection once lived. It lingers as a warning, a reminder that some departures are not gentle goodbyes, but swift erasures.